Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey that will completely change how you think about your own sleep. Picture this. It's midnight in medieval England, the year 1398, and instead of being fast asleep like we'd expect, the entire village is awake. Not because of an emergency, not because of insomnia. They're awake because that's exactly what they're supposed to do. You see, our ancestors believed that sleeping straight through the night, the way you and I do, was actually dangerous, unnatural, and could even invite death into your bedroom. In fact, if a medieval person saw how we sleep today, 8 hours straight, they'd probably think we were either cursed or already half dead. So before we dive deeper into this fascinating world of medieval slumber, I'd love if you could help our little community grow. If these stories bring you comfort at night, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button. Think of it as tucking our channel into your YouTube family. And hey, drop a like if you're already intrigued, or save it for later when the story truly captures your imagination. I'm curious, are you watching this bundled up in bed right now? Or maybe you're that rebel listening while doing late-night chores? Let me know in the comments where in the world you're joining me from tonight. Now, dim those harsh lights, let the darkness wrap around you like a medieval cloak, and let's uncover why our ancestors divided their night into two separate sleeps. Imagine yourself as a peasant in 14th century France. The sun has just set, and you've finished your evening meal, probably some bread, ale, and if you're lucky, a bit of cheese. By 8 or 9 o'clock, you're climbing into bed. But here's where things get interesting. You're not planning to sleep until dawn. Oh no, you're only planning to sleep for about 3 to 4 hours. This first sleep, what they called primo somno or first sleep, was as natural to medieval people as checking our phones before bed is to us. The historian Roger Kirch, who spent over 15 years researching pre-industrial sleep patterns, discovered something remarkable. In over 500 references from diaries, court records, medical books, and literature from Homer's Odyssey to Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, he found consistent mentions of first sleep and second sleep. It wasn't just a quirky habit of a few people. It was the standard way humans slept for thousands of years. Let me paint you a picture of what this actually looked like. John Locke, the famous philosopher, wrote in 1690 about a doctor's prescription that included spending the time between first and second sleep in meditation. Can you imagine your doctor today prescribing you a midnight wake-up call for some quality thinking time? But back then, this was completely normal medical advice. So what exactly did people do during this mysterious wakeful period? Well, this is where it gets really fascinating. For about 1 to 2 hours every single night, medieval people had what they considered sacred time. The French called it dorveil, a state between sleeping and waking. Some would lie quietly in bed, reflecting on their dreams, because dreams from the first sleep were believed to be the most truthful, sent directly from the divine realm. Thomas Middleton, writing in 1608, mentioned that after first sleep was the best time for serious study and contemplation. Students would wake up to memorize their lessons. Scholars would work on complex problems. The mind, they believed, was clearest in these midnight hours, washed clean by the first sleep and ready for profound thoughts. But it wasn't all meditation and study. This was also, shall we say, prime time for romance. A 16th century French physician noted that couples who wanted to conceive should make love after the first sleep, because both partners would be refreshed and more likely to enjoy the process. Church records from medieval England show a suspicious number of children conceived exactly 9 months after the long winter nights, when this wakeful period would have been longest. Coincidence? I think not. Labour agreements from the era even accounted for this split sleep pattern. Servants' contracts specified they could not leave their quarters after first sleep without permission. Police records from medieval Paris show that most petty crimes happened not late at night or early morning, but specifically after first sleep, that wakeful period when some people were up to no good instead of prayer. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth did they sleep this way? The answer reveals something profound about how different their world was from ours. Without artificial light, medieval people lived by the rhythm of the sun. When darkness fell, usually around 8 p.m. in winter, there wasn't much else to do but sleep. But here's the thing, the human body, without artificial light interference, naturally wants about 12 hours of rest-related time, but only needs about 8 hours of actual sleep. Dr. Thomas Wehr, a psychiatrist at the National Institute of Mental Health, conducted a fascinating experiment in the 1990s. He placed people in darkness for 14 hours a day for a month, mimicking medieval winter conditions. Guess what happened? Within weeks, every single participant naturally fell into the exact same two-sleep pattern our ancestors followed. First sleep, wake period, second sleep. Their bodies remembered an ancient rhythm we've completely forgotten. During that wakeful period, Wehr's subjects experienced something remarkable. Their brains showed unique brainwave patterns, a peaceful, meditative state. They reported profound insights, creative breakthroughs, and a sense of peace they'd never experienced before. Blood tests revealed elevated levels of prolactin, the hormone associated with the feeling of satisfaction and calm. Medieval people accessed this natural high every single night. The Church, always eager to guide every aspect of medieval life, had very specific instructions for this wakeful time. The Benedictine monks were required to wake for matins, prayers specifically scheduled between first and second sleep. They believed this was when the veil between heaven and earth was thinnest. Devils were most active, yes, but so were angels. Prayers said during this time were thought to be especially powerful. A medieval prayer manual from 1485 instructs, "When thou wakest from thy first sleep, make the sign of the cross and say, Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit. For at this hour demons seek to enter thy second sleep and disturb thy soul with terrible visions." Kind of makes you appreciate just rolling over and going back to sleep, doesn't it? Common people had their own rituals. They'd check on their animals, stoke the fire to keep the house warm, or simply lie in bed talking with their spouse about the day's events and tomorrow's plans. Imagine that. A built-in time for couples to actually communicate every single night without the distraction of phones, TVs, or the pressure to get up for work in a few hours. Samuel Pepys, the famous diarist, regularly wrote about waking after his first sleep. One entry from 1664 reads, "Waked at 2 o'clock and lay talking with my wife about our plans for the new house until we fell into our morning sleep." These midnight conversations were so normal, he barely thought them worth mentioning except in passing. But here's something that might surprise you. This two-sleep system wasn't just about rest. Medieval people believed it was essential for health. Medical texts from the period warn that those who sleep too long in one stretch risk melancholic humours pooling in the body. They thought uninterrupted sleep could cause everything from weight gain to madness. One physician wrote in 1551 that, "They that sleep long and lie still, their humours putrefy and engender diseases." The thing is, they might have been onto something. Modern research suggests that breaking up sleep might help with problem-solving and emotional regulation. That wakeful period naturally reduces stress hormones and increases creativity-boosting neurochemicals. We've traded this for the efficiency of one long sleep, but at what cost? By the 1920s, this ancient sleep pattern had completely disappeared from industrialized societies. Electric lights, factory schedules and the efficiency-obsessed modern world squeezed out that midnight wakeful period, we began to see waking up at night as insomnia, a problem to be fixed with pills, rather than a natural part of human sleep architecture that existed for millennia. Think about this for a moment. If you've ever woken up at 2 or 3 a.m., fully alert, your brain buzzing with thoughts, unable to fall back asleep immediately, you weren't broken. Your body was just remembering something your great-great-great-grandparents did every single night of their lives. You were experiencing a ghost of the two-sleep system, echoing across the centuries. As we prepare to drift into the next chapter of our journey, where we'll meet the terrifying creatures medieval people believed visited during these vulnerable sleep hours, I want you to notice something. Tonight, if you wake up in the small hours, instead of checking your phone or fretting about lost sleep, try lying still for a moment. Feel that ancient rhythm your ancestors knew. Who knows? You might just experience that mysterious dorve state, that magical space between dreams and waking where medieval people found their deepest insights. But beware, because medieval people had good reason to pray during their midnight waking. They knew that sleep made you vulnerable to visitors from other realms. Demons, they believed, were waiting for that exact moment when your soul loosened from your body during sleep. And these weren't just abstract spiritual threats. No, these demons had names, forms, and very specific appetites. Some came for your breath, others for your dreams, and the most terrifying ones, well, they came for much more than that. You know that feeling when you're lying in bed, and suddenly you're wide awake, heart pounding, certain that something is in the room with you. That primitive fear that makes every shadow seem alive. Well, medieval people knew exactly what that something was. They had names for it. They had protection rituals against it. And most terrifyingly, they had thousands of documented cases of people who claimed these night visitors left very real, very physical evidence of their visits. In 1486, Heinrich Kramer wrote in the infamous Malleus Maleficarum that demons do indeed collect human semen, and through incubi and succubi, they can produce offspring that walk among us. This wasn't some fringe belief from a village madman. This was official church doctrine, endorsed by Pope Innocent VIII himself. Can you imagine living in a world where the highest authorities insisted that the thing watching you from the corner of your bedroom was absolutely, scientifically real? Let me tell you about Sister Christina of Stommeln, a nun from 13th century Germany, whose case was so well documented it became required reading for medieval priests. Every night, she claimed, a demon would enter her cell after first sleep. But here's what makes her story fascinating. She didn't just feel its presence. She described physical sensations, weight on her chest, marks on her body, even a sulphurous smell that lingered until morning prayers. Her fellow nuns confirmed these signs, documenting everything in meticulous detail. The bruises, the scratches, the unexplained heat in her cell during winter nights. The medical explanation from the period's leading physicians was disturbingly specific. Physician Johann Weyer wrote in 1563 that incubi and succubi could manipulate the four humours of the body during sleep, drawing blood to certain parts, creating sensations indistinguishable from physical touch. They believed sleep opened doorways in your body, literally. Your pores expanded, your soul loosened its grip, and demons could slip inside like smoke through a keyhole. But why were medieval people so absolutely convinced these creatures existed? Well, they had what they considered irrefutable proof. Take the case of Angèle de la Barthe, tried in Toulouse in 1275. She confessed, granted, under torture, to having intimate relations with an incubus for 7 years. The shocking part: She claimed to have given birth to a creature with a wolf's head and a serpent's tail. The court records preserved in the Toulouse Municipal Archives describe how midwives examined her and confirmed physical evidence of recent childbirth. Whether you believe her story or not, those medieval judges certainly did. They burned her at the stake. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Different social classes believed they attracted different types of night demons. Peasants dealt with crude, violent demons that left them exhausted and drained. But nobility? Oh, they got the sophisticated demons. Beautiful succubi who appeared as deceased lovers or incubi who took the form of knights and troubadours. Even demons apparently had social hierarchies. The remedies people used reveal just how real this fear was. Let me share some actual prescriptions from a 14th century medical text I came across in my research. The Physicians of Midfi. First, you'd need to eat bread made with angelica root before bed. They believed its holy name would repel demons. Then, sprinkle salt in a complete circle around your bed, making sure there were no gaps. Place iron nails under your pillow, because demons supposedly couldn't touch iron. And here's my favourite. Keep a chamber pot made of cold iron beside your bed. Not just for convenience, but because the combination of iron and, well, human waste was thought to be absolutely repulsive to demons. Some of these protection methods were genuinely dangerous. There's a case from 1491 in Nuremberg where a merchant named Hans Dürer, yes, older brother of the famous artist Albrecht Dürer, nearly burned his house down keeping lit candles surrounding his bed all night to ward off an incubus. He survived, but his neighbour wasn't so lucky when the fire spread. The church had its own solutions, of course. The Ritual Romanum, the official book of Catholic rites, included specific exorcisms for those plagued by incubi and succubi. The prayer went, "I adjure thee, ancient serpent, by the judge of the living and the dead, depart from this servant of God during their time of sleep." Priests would sprinkle holy water on beds, place consecrated hosts under pillows, and sometimes even sleep in the room with the afflicted to witness and combat these demons directly. Father Ludovico Maria Sinistrari, a 17th century Franciscan monk and advisor to the Roman Inquisition, wrote an entire theological treatise called De Demonialitate about these creatures. He argued that incubi and succubi weren't just spiritual beings, but had quasi-physical bodies made of condensed air. He wrote, "These demons can assume bodies of such subtle matter that they can penetrate through the pores of human skin." He even calculated their body temperature, slightly cooler than humans, which explained why victims often reported feeling cold during encounters. Want to hear something that'll make your skin crawl? Medieval people believed these demons had preferences. Young people between 14 and 25 were considered most at risk. Why? Because their vital essences were strongest, making them irresistible to demons who fed on human energy. Parents would literally guard their teenage children's bedrooms, taking shifts through the night. The legal system took these creatures seriously too. In 1468, the Parliament of Paris officially ruled that children born from unions with incubi had no inheritance rights. Think about that. The highest court in France created actual legislation for demon offspring. They even had a term for these children: cambions. These supposed half-demons were blamed for everything from plague outbreaks to failed harvests. King James I of England was so concerned about night demons that he personally wrote a book called Demonology in 1597. He described how witches would summon succubi to steal men's seed, then transform into incubi to impregnate women with it. He wrote, "The devil can take the shape of a dead person's ghost and abuse the living in their sleep, leaving them with no memory but strange marks upon their body." This wasn't some obscure text. It was required reading for judges presiding over witch trials. But here's a detail that might actually make you laugh, or at least smile nervously. medieval people debated extensively about demon anatomy. Thomas Aquinas, one of the greatest theological minds of the Middle Ages, spent considerable time pondering whether demons had functional reproductive organs. His conclusion: they could create the appearance of such organs from compressed air and shadow, but couldn't experience pleasure. Imagine being a medieval scholar, and that being your doctoral thesis topic. These symptoms people reported are eerily consistent across centuries and cultures: a weight on the chest, paralysis, a sense of an evil presence, strange arousal mixed with terror. Today, we call this sleep paralysis, affecting about 8% of the population at least once in their lifetime. Your brain wakes up, but your body remains in the paralyzed state of REM sleep. Hallucinations fill in the terrifying blanks. But medieval people experience something we don't: collective validation of these experiences. When you woke up paralyzed with a shadow figure on your chest, your family didn't suggest you see a therapist. They called the priest. Your neighbors didn't think you were crazy. They shared their own demon stories. There was comfort in that shared terror, strange as it sounds. The artist Johann Heinrich Füssli captured this perfectly in his 1781 painting The Nightmare, showing an incubus perched on a sleeping woman's chest. But here's what's fascinating. He painted this during the Enlightenment, when supposedly nobody believed in such things anymore. Yet the painting became wildly popular. Why? Because people still had these experiences. They just stopped talking about them. Let me share one last story that perfectly captures the medieval mindset. In 1458, a young woman named Magdalena in Munich claimed an incubus visited her every night for 3 months. The local bishop investigated and found something odd. Her room was always warm even in winter and had a sweet smell like foreign spices. The demon, she said, appeared as a handsome merchant who spoke of lands beyond the sea. Modern historians studying her case suggest she might have been having an affair with an actual foreign merchant, using the incubus story as cover. But here's the thing: the bishop believed her completely. He performed an exorcism, declared her freed from demonic influence, and she later married a local baker with her reputation intact. Sometimes, these demon stories might have been the only way for people to speak about unspeakable things. You know what's truly unsettling? If you talk to nurses who work night shifts in hospitals, they'll tell you about patients who still report these experiences. They don't call them incubi anymore. They say, "Someone was in my room," or "something was pressing on my chest." The demons have different names now: aliens, shadow people, the old hag. But the experience remains hauntingly similar. As we leave behind these midnight visitors and their terrifying embraces, remember this: medieval people didn't just fear what might happen during sleep. They believed that the very act of sleeping, the position of your body, the direction of your bed, could literally be the difference between waking up refreshed or not waking up at all. Because in the medieval mind, your bedroom wasn't just a place of rest. It was a battlefield where life and death played out every single night. And death, as you're about to discover, had some very specific preferences about how you arranged your pillows. Death, medieval physicians insisted, didn't always come dramatically with sword or plague. Sometimes it crept in through your bedroom window, pooled in the corner where you placed your bed, or waited patiently in the very feathers of your pillow. According to the medical text Rosa Anglica, written by John of Gaddesden in 1314, physician to King Edward II, more Christians die in their beds from improper sleeping than Saracens kill in all their wars. Just let that sink in for a moment. The leading medical authority of medieval England literally believed your bedroom was more dangerous than a battlefield. Here's something that would have horrified any medieval person: the way you're probably lying right now. If your feet are pointing toward the door, You're basically inviting death to drag you out feet first, the way corpses were removed from homes. If your head points north, you're aligning yourself with evil forces that flow along the Earth's invisible lines. And if you're one of those people who sleeps on their stomach, well, medieval physicians would have given you about 3 months to live. The Taquinum Sanitatis, a wildly popular medieval health handbook that was like the WebMD of the 14th century, devoted an entire chapter to the deadly arrangements of sleep. According to this text, translated from the Arabic work of Ibn Butlan, sleeping with your head lower than your feet would cause blood to pool in the brain, resulting in apoplexy, madness, or sudden death. They recommended placing exactly 3 pillows under your head, not 2, not 4, but 3, to maintain the precise angle that kept your humours flowing correctly. But the real danger? Drafts. Not the kind that makes you pull up your blanket, but the kind that could supposedly kill you in minutes. Arnold of Villanova, physician to kings and popes in the late 13th century, wrote in his Regimen Sanitatis that a draught upon a sleeping person is more deadly than poison in wine. He described cases where healthy young men went to bed near a cracked window and were found dead by morning, their bodies twisted in agony from what he called wind-induced humour corruption. Let me tell you about the bizarre case of Duke Humphrey of Gloucester, brother to King Henry V. In February 1447, he was found dead in his bed at Bury St Edmunds. The official cause? His servants had accidentally left his bedroom window open on a cold night, and the malignant air had entered his lungs while he slept, freezing his vital spirits. Modern historians suspect he was actually murdered, probably poisoned, but the fact that everyone immediately accepted the open window explanation tells you everything about medieval fears of bedroom air. The orientation of your bed wasn't just superstition, it was considered serious medical science. Pietro d'Abano, a professor of medicine at the University of Padua, calculated in 1303 that beds aligned east-west would harmonize with the celestial spheres, while north-south alignment would cause magnetic disruption of the body's natural spirits. He even created elaborate charts showing which bed positions would cure specific ailments: kidney stones, sleep with your head pointing southeast, melancholy, northwest, but only during a waning moon. Now here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. Medieval physicians believed that certain bedroom materials could literally suck the life out of you while you slept. Feather pillows from certain birds were considered deadly. The Breviarium Bartholomeae, a medical text from 12th century England, warned that pillows made from owl feathers would cause nightmares so severe they could stop your heart. Raven feathers would steal your memory, and peacock feathers? Those were believed to contain the evil eye and would curse anyone who slept on them. The wealthy had their own unique bedroom dangers. Take the concept of bed curtains. Today, we might think of them as luxurious, but medieval medical texts are full of warnings about how they could kill you. Guy de Chauliac, surgeon to 3 popes, wrote in 1363 that bed curtains trap the poisonous exhalations of sleep, creating a toxic cloud that, when rebreathed, corrupts the blood and causes sudden death. He recommended that curtains be opened every 2 hours during the night, meaning someone had to stay awake to do this. The colour of your bedroom could supposedly kill you too. The physician Bernard de Gordon, writing at the University of Montpellier in 1305, claimed that red bedchambers would overheat the blood, causing fever and madness, while completely white rooms would drain the vital essence, leaving one a walking corpse. Blue was considered safest, but only a specific shade, what they called celestial blue, that matched the colour of the sky at noon. Any other blue could cause melancholic suffocation. Even your sleeping position was a matter of life and death. The Compendium Medicinae by Gilbertus Anglicus from 1230 states that sleeping on your right side would compress the liver, causing yellow bile to flood the body, resulting in rage, fever, and death within 7 days. Left side, that compressed the heart and invited cardiac failure. The only safe position was on your back, with arms crossed over your chest. Yes, essentially the corpse position, which they believed prepared the soul for either awakening or paradise. I found a fascinating case in the records of the Coroner's Rolls of London from 1322. A merchant named William de Nottingham was found dead in his bed, and the coroner's inquest spent 3 days investigating whether his death was caused by sleeping with his mouth open. Witnesses testified about his snoring habits, the angle of his jaw, and whether he'd eaten cheese before bed, which was believed to cause deadly dreams if combined with mouth breathing. The final verdict? Death by nocturnal air poisoning through open-mouth sleeping. The mattress itself could be your doom. Straw mattresses were considered safer than feather beds, but only if the straw was harvested at the right time. The Ruralia Commoda by Pietro de Crescenzi, written in 1305, specified that straw cut during a full moon would cause lunacy, while straw cut during the day would be too solar charged and cause fever dreams. The ideal straw was cut at dawn on a Thursday, Thor's Day, when the protective powers were strongest. Temperature regulation was an obsession that makes modern thermostat wars look trivial. According to the Liber de Conservanda Sanitate by Benedetto Reguardati from 1445, the bedroom needed to be kept at precisely the temperature of fresh milk from a cow. Too warm, and your humours would boil. Too cold, and they would congeal. Wealthy households employed temperature servants, whose sole job was to add or remove blankets throughout the night to maintain this perfect balance. But perhaps the most elaborate death prevention ritual involved mirrors. Medieval medical theory, influenced by Arabic texts, held that mirrors in bedrooms were potentially lethal. Why? During sleep, they believed your soul partially left your body. If it saw its reflection, it might become confused and fail to return, leaving you dead or insane. The solution? All mirrors had to be covered with black cloth at night, a practice that persisted in some cultures well into the 20th century. The paranoia extended to sounds as well. Church bells ringing while you slept were thought to shatter the delicate connection between body and soul. The medical faculty at the University of Paris issued an official decree in 1348 stating that anyone who died in their sleep during bell ringing could not be held responsible for any sins committed in their final moments, as their soul was considered dispersed by sacred sound. John Ardern, surgeon to nobility and author of Practica Chirurgiae in 1376, documented what he called bed-death syndrome. He described patients who went to sleep healthy and woke up paralyzed or dead, which he attributed to sleeping in the wrong lunar phase while facing an inauspicious direction with improper pillow elevation. His recommended prevention? A complex ritual involving blessing the bed with holy water, placing bread under the mattress, and ensuring no cats were within 50 feet of the sleeping person. You want to know the really tragic part? Some of these beliefs actually killed people. There are documented cases of individuals staying awake for days, terrified to sleep because their astrologer had declared it an inauspicious sleeping period. Others slept in such contorted positions to avoid deadly alignments that they developed serious musculoskeletal problems. The fear of bedroom death became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Here's a detail that might sound familiar to anyone who's Googled symptoms at 3 a.m. Wealthy medieval people kept death prevention manuals beside their beds. These books contained hundreds of rules about sleeping safely. The Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, the most popular medical text of the Middle Ages, had a checklist of 47 things to verify before sleeping. window positions, moon phase, last food eaten, prayer said, bed orientation, pillow herbs, and on and on. Imagine trying to fall asleep after running through that list every night. The strangest part? Some of these beliefs had kernels of truth wrapped in layers of superstition. Poor ventilation in medieval bedrooms with their small windows and smoke from fires could indeed be dangerous. Carbon monoxide poisoning from poorly ventilated heating was probably responsible for many of these mysterious bedroom deaths. The damp straw mattresses could harbour deadly moulds. The lead-based face powders wealthy women wore to bed were actually toxic. Medieval people observed real dangers, but explained them through the lens of humoral theory and supernatural forces. As we close the door on these deadly bedrooms with their fatal drafts and killer pillows, consider this. Medieval people lived in constant negotiation with death, even in their most vulnerable moments of rest. Every night survived was a small victory against forces both seen and unseen. But sleep held more than just danger for our ancestors. It held messages from the divine, visions of the future, prophecies that could topple kingdoms or crown kings. Because in the medieval mind, dreams weren't just random neural firing, they were communications from God himself, and interpreting them correctly could mean the difference between salvation and damnation, between victory and devastating defeat. Picture this scene. It's April 23rd, 1014, and the entire Irish army is frozen in place, watching their king, Brian Boru, as he emerges from his tent, face pale as fresh parchment. He's just awakened from a dream. In it, he saw himself victorious at the Battle of Clontarf, driving the Vikings from Ireland forever. But he also saw his own death, a Norse axe splitting his skull while he prayed in his tent. His generals beg him to stay behind, to let them lead the battle. But Brian knows what medieval people knew with absolute certainty. Dreams, especially royal dreams, weren't suggestions. They were contracts written by God himself. Brian rode into battle, won Ireland's freedom, and died exactly as his dream foretold, axe to the skull, in his tent while praying. The dream was so accurate that chroniclers wondered if refusing it would have been the greater sin than death itself. This wasn't just Irish superstition. Across medieval Europe, from peasant hovels to royal palaces, dreams weren't merely the brain's nighttime entertainment. They were divine telegrams, supernatural intelligence reports, and sometimes death sentences written in the language of sleep. The medieval mind divided dreams into categories more complex than any modern sleep scientist would dare attempt. According to Macrobius's Commentary on the Dream of Scipio, written in 400 AD but studied obsessively throughout the Middle Ages, there were 5 types of dreams: the enigmatic dream that required interpretation, the prophetic vision that showed the future plainly, the oracular dream where authority figures gave advice, the nightmare sent by demons, and the apparition that occurred between sleeping and waking. But here's what made royal dreams different and terrifying. When a king dreamed, the entire kingdom held its breath. Because medieval theology taught that monarchs were God's appointed representatives on earth, their dreams weren't personal. They were divine messages about the fate of entire nations. The Annales Regni Francorum, the official chronicles of Charlemagne's empire, records that in 809 AD, Charlemagne delayed a major military campaign for 3 months because he dreamed of a great star falling from the sky. His advisors spent weeks debating what it meant, finally concluding it foretold the death of a great leader. They were right. The Byzantine emperor Nikephoros died that year, completely reshaping European politics. Let me tell you about one of the most documented prophetic dreams in medieval history. In 1064, Edward the Confessor, King of England, called his entire court to Westminster Abbey on his deathbed. He'd just awakened from what he called a vision most terrible and wondrous. According to the Vita Edwardi Regis, written by a monk who was present, Edward described seeing two monks he'd known in Normandy, both dead for decades, who told him that England would be given into the hands of enemies, and devils shall come through all this land with fire and sword and the havoc of war. Within a year, the Norman conquest began, and everything Edward dreamed came to pass with such accuracy that William the Conqueror himself later cited Edward's dream as proof that God had ordained his victory. The Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII, Porphyrogenitos, took dreams so seriously that he created an official position, the Imperial Dream Interpreter, who held the rank equivalent to a modern cabinet minister. This wasn't some ceremonial role. The dream interpreter had real power. According to De Ceremonis, Constantine's book on court protocol, the emperor had to report every dream immediately upon waking. The interpreter would then consult dream manuals, astronomical charts, and biblical texts before presenting an official interpretation that could reshape imperial policy. Medieval dream interpretation manuals were bestsellers of their time. The most popular, the Somnial Danielis, Dream Book of Daniel, claimed to be based on the prophet Daniel's wisdom and contained over 500 dream symbols with their meanings. Dreaming of clear water meant coming wealth. Muddy water foretold lawsuits. Losing teeth meant a family member would die, but only if the teeth fell out painlessly. If they hurt coming out, it meant you'd outlive your enemies. These weren't folk superstitions. They were cited in legal documents. I found a case from 1367 in the records of the papal court at Avignon, where a woman's dream of her husband losing teeth was admitted as evidence that she knew of his impending death and might have poisoned him. The political power of dreams reached absurd heights during the reign of Henry VI of England. Henry, who suffered from what modern historians believe was schizophrenia, experienced vivid prophetic dreams that his advisors treated as divine revelation. The Paston Letters, a collection of family correspondence from the period, describe how in 1453 Henry dreamed that the Virgin Mary told him to found a college at Cambridge. He woke up, immediately diverted crown funds in the middle of the Wars of the Roses, and founded King's College. The chapel he insisted on building based on exact dimensions Mary gave him in the dream nearly bankrupted the royal treasury, but perhaps no medieval ruler was more controlled by dreams than Emperor Frederick II, called Stupa Mundi, the wonder of the world. His court chronicler, Matthew Paris, records that Frederick kept a team of 12 dream interpreters from different traditions: Christian, Jewish, Islamic, and even one he imported from India. Before any major decision, Frederick would deliberately induce prophetic dreams using a technique he learned from Arabic texts. Fasting for 3 days, bathing in rose water, and sleeping on a bed of laurel leaves while burning frankincense. In 1228, he claimed a dream showed him entering Jerusalem peacefully, so he negotiated a treaty with the Sultan instead of fighting, securing Jerusalem without bloodshed, a decision that got him excommunicated but also proved remarkably successful. The techniques for inducing prophetic dreams were taken deadly seriously. The Liber de Virtutibus Herbarum by Albertus Magnus provided recipes for dream-inducing pillow stuffings. Mugwort would bring true dreams. Jasmine would allow you to speak with the dead. Heliotrope would reveal the future, but only on Sundays. And here's the unsettling part. Some of these herbs actually contain psychoactive compounds. Medieval dreamers were essentially microdosing themselves into altered states every night. Women's prophetic dreams occupied a strange position in medieval society. Officially, the church was suspicious of female prophets, but when their dreams proved accurate, they couldn't be ignored. Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century abbess, recorded her prophetic dreams in Scivias, Know the Ways. describing visions so detailed that modern neurologists studying her descriptions believe she experienced temporal lobe epilepsy or severe migraines with aura. But here's what's remarkable. Pope Eugenius III officially validated her dreams as divine prophecy in 1147, making her one of the few women whose dreams could legally influence church policy. The pressure to have meaningful dreams could be crushing. Joan of Arc's trial records from 1431 reveal that her judges spent 3 entire days interrogating her about her dreams, trying to determine if they were divine or demonic. They asked about colours, sounds, smells, the direction figures approached from, whether she felt heat or cold, details that would determine whether she was a saint or a witch. When she insisted that her voices came to her while awake, not in dreams, one judge accused her of lying because God speaks to his chosen only through dreams, as he did to Joseph and Daniel. Dream prophecy wasn't limited to the elite. The Chronicle of Lanarcost records that in 1290, a peasant named William of Durham dreamed that the Scottish throne would pass to a child who would unite Scotland and England. He travelled for weeks to tell King Edward Thieves, who initially had him flogged for wasting royal time. But when Margaret, the Maid of Norway, a child who stood to inherit both thrones, died mysteriously on her way to Scotland, Edward remembered William's dream and had him brought back to court to describe every detail. Some historians believe this dream influenced Edward's later brutal attempts to conquer Scotland. Convinced he was fighting against a prophecy, the economics of dream interpretation created an entire industry. Professional dream interpreters set up shops in major cities, charging fees based on the dream's complexity. The Guild Records of Paris from 1380 list officially licensed dormeurs sacrés, sacred sleepers, who would sleep in churches or shrines to receive dreams on behalf of paying clients. Rich merchants would pay these professional dreamers to sleep at the tomb of a saint before major business ventures, believing dreams received in holy places were more reliable than those in ordinary beds. Here's a detail that might make you reconsider your own dreams. Medieval people kept dream diaries with the dedication of modern stock traders tracking investments. The mystic Marjorie Kemp's autobiography, the first in English, devotes entire chapters to her dreams and their later fulfillment. She claimed that in 1413 she dreamed of a great fire in Lynn that would destroy everything except her house. She warned the town, was mocked, but when a fire did break out in 1421 and mysteriously spared her house, she became locally famous as a prophetess. The medical understanding of prophetic dreams was surprisingly sophisticated. Physicians distinguish between dreams caused by bodily humours and those of divine origin. Constantinus Africanus, in his Pantegni, 1087, wrote that true prophetic dreams occurred only in the early morning hours when the soul, having digested the vapours of food, could perceive clearly the emanations of the celestial spheres. This is eerily close to modern understanding of REM sleep patterns, which do intensify toward morning. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of medieval dream prophecy was the concept of borrowed dreams. It was believed that powerful dreamers could transfer their prophetic dreams to others. The Chronica Majora describes how King Louis IX of France, before embarking on the Seventh Crusade, prayed to receive the dreams meant for his recently deceased mother, Blanche of Castile, who was renowned for her prophetic abilities. He claimed to receive a dream where she showed him dying in Tunisia, exactly where and how he would die 20 years later. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 was preceded by a wave of prophetic dreams across Europe. The Serbian despot Đurađ Branković recorded that his entire court experienced the same dream on the same night. The dome of the Hagia Sophia cracking open with blood pouring out. The Duke of Burgundy's chronicle describes similar dreams among his courtiers. When news of Constantinople's fall arrived weeks later, These dreams were seen as proof that the spiritual world had registered the catastrophe before the physical world. As we drift away from these divine visions and prophetic revelations, remember that for medieval people, every dream was a potential message, every nightmare a possible warning, every peaceful slumber a chance for divine communication. But there was 1 hour of the night when the boundary between the sleeping and waking worlds, between the living and the dead, between the earthly and the divine, became so thin that ordinary people could touch the infinite. This was the sacred hour of midnight prayer, when monks rose from their beds, when families gathered in darkness, when the entire medieval world participated in a ritual that they believed literally held back the forces of evil and maintained the cosmic order. And if you missed this appointment with the divine, well, that's when things got truly terrifying. There's a moment tonight, yes, tonight, when according to medieval belief, the veil between our world and the divine realm becomes so gossamer thin that a whispered prayer could reach the throne of God himself. At the exact moment when today becomes tomorrow, when midnight strikes, something extraordinary was believed to happen. The demons that plagued the night temporarily lost their power. Angels descended closer to earth, and every single person who rose from their warm bed to pray became a spiritual warrior in a cosmic battle that determined whether the sun would rise again. In the winter of 1347, as the Black Death swept through Europe, the chronicler Jean de Venette wrote that in villages where people stopped rising for midnight prayers, the death rate doubled within days. Coincidence? The medieval mind didn't believe in coincidences. Think about this for a moment. Imagine setting an alarm for midnight every single night, not to check your phone or grab a snack, but to engage in spiritual warfare. The rule of Saint Benedict, written in 516 AD and followed by thousands of monasteries throughout the Middle Ages, commanded monks to rise for matins, also called vigils, the night office that began between midnight and 2 a.m. But here's what's fascinating. This wasn't just for monks. Ordinary people, from peasants to princes, participated in their own midnight devotions, believing that prayers said during these dark hours carried special power that daylight prayers could never match. The theological reasoning was beautifully elaborate. According to Honorius of Autun's Gemma Animae, written in 1120, midnight was the exact hour when Christ was born, when he was arrested in Gethsemane, and when he would return for the second coming. It was simultaneously the hour of greatest vulnerability and greatest power. Miss it, and you weren't just being spiritually lazy, you were literally abandoning your post in the eternal battle between good and evil. Let me share something from the personal diary of Marjorie Kempe, that extraordinary medieval woman from Norfolk. She writes in 1438, "On the Thursday before Christmas, I was awakened as was my custom at midnight, but being exceeding weary, I turned again to sleep. Whereupon I heard a voice terrible as thunder saying, 'Thou hast failed thy watch, and for this 7 demons have entered thy neighbour's house.' The next morning I learned that Goodwife Jeanette had been struck with a palsy in the night and could no longer speak." Marjorie never missed midnight prayer again. The aristocracy took this so seriously that they employed awakeners, servants whose sole job was to ensure the family rose for midnight prayers. The household accounts of Edward III of England from 1345 show he paid his awakener, one Robert de Chesham, the substantial sum of 40 shillings per year, more than a skilled carpenter earned, just to wake him at midnight. The contract preserved in the National Archives specifies that if Robert failed to wake the king, and spiritual harm befell the realm, he would forfeit not just his wages but potentially his life. But the midnight hour wasn't just about protection from evil. It was about accessing supernatural knowledge. The Revelations of Bridget of Sweden, written in the 1340s, describes how she received her most profound visions specifically at midnight. She claimed that Christ himself told her, "Those who seek me in the darkness of night shall find me, for I reveal mysteries in the hour when the world sleeps." Her midnight visions became so influential that they shaped papal policy and influenced the return of the papacy from Avignon to Rome. The Byzantine Emperor Leo VI, called Leo the Wise, wrote in his Tactica that armies should post double guards at midnight, not because of enemy attacks, but because at this hour prayers ascend unimpeded to heaven, and likewise curses descend unhindered to earth. He mandated that his soldiers take turns praying at midnight, creating a continuous chain of prayer that he believed formed a spiritual shield around the empire. Here's where it gets genuinely eerie. Medieval chroniclers repeatedly reported strange phenomena occurring when midnight prayers were neglected. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle entry for 1091 describes how the monks of Glastonbury Abbey, exhausted from rebuilding after a fire, decided to skip matins for just one night. That very night, witnesses reported seeing a great company of devils dancing in the ruins where the altar had stood, and the sound of their revelry woke the entire town. The monks never missed midnight prayer again. The medical understanding of midnight prayer was surprisingly complex. Physicians like Arnold of Villanova argued in his Regimen Sanitatis, 1307, that rising at midnight actually promoted health by preventing the accumulation of melancholic humours that gather in the sleeping body. He prescribed specific prayers for different ailments: the Pater Noster for headaches, the Ave Maria for stomach troubles, and the Credo for joint pain, but only if said exactly at midnight when the healing virtues of heaven descended closest to earth. Women's midnight devotions took on a particularly intense character. The Ancren Vis, a 13th century guide for anchoresses, female religious recluses, instructs them to rise at midnight and immediately strike their breast 3 times while saying mea culpa to shock the soul awake before demons could take advantage of the drowsy state. These women would then spend up to 2 hours in prayer, often while holding uncomfortable positions, arms outstretched like Christ on the cross, or kneeling on dried peas, to ensure they stayed awake. The economics of midnight prayer created an entire industry. Wealthy merchants who couldn't wake for prayers would pay others to pray on their behalf. The Guild Records of Venice from 1423 list professional midnight intercessors who would accept payment to include specific names in their midnight prayers. The going rate, 1 silver grosso per name per week. Some of these professional prayers claim to maintain lists of over 300 names, creating a sort of medieval prayer subscription service. Children weren't exempt from this midnight ritual. The treatise De Proprietatibus Rerum by Bartholomeus Anglicus, 1240, recommends waking children at midnight at least once a week to pray, believing this would imprint upon their souls the rhythm of divine communication. He describes a haunting practice where mothers would carry sleeping infants to the window at midnight, holding them up to the moon while whispering prayers, believing this would protect them from sudden infant death. The midnight prayer had specific rules that seem almost obsessive-compulsive by modern standards. According to the Pontifical of Guillaume Durand in 1286, you had to wash your hands and face with cold water before praying. Warm water would make you sleepy, and demons could exploit drowsiness. You should face east, unless it was the feast day of a saint, in which case you faced the direction of their shrine. You must never pray lying down at midnight, as this was the position of the dead and might confuse angels about whether you needed blessing or last rites. Perhaps the most elaborate midnight ritual belonged to the Knights Templar. Their rule, confirmed by the Council of Troyes in 1129, required them to rise at midnight for prayers that lasted exactly 1 hour and 13 minutes, the extra 13 minutes commemorating the 13 disciples at the Last Supper. They would begin by striking their shields with their swords to wake the angels and frighten the demons, then proceed through a complex series of prayers, genuflections and sword salutes that they believed created a spiritual fortress around their commanderies. The political implications of midnight prayer could be enormous. When King Philip IV of France arrested the Templars on Friday, October 13th, 1307, he specifically timed the arrest for midnight, knowing they would all be gathered in their chapels, unarmed and vulnerable. The cosmic irony wasn't lost on medieval commentators, using the sacred hour to destroy those who guarded it. I discovered a fascinating case in the records of the Inquisition from 1455. A woman named Isabella de Luna from Saragossa was accused of heresy, not for what she believed, but for when she prayed. Neighbours reported that she rose to pray at midnight but faced south toward Mecca rather than east toward Jerusalem. Her defence? She claimed an angel had appeared to her at midnight and told her that all sincere midnight prayers reached God regardless of direction. The inquisitors spent 6 months debating whether midnight prayers were so powerful they could override improper form. They ultimately acquitted her, but required her to pay for a priest to supervise her midnight prayers for a year. The fear of missing midnight prayers could be paralyzing. The mystic Julian of Norwich writes in her Revelations of Divine Love, 1395, about a merchant who became so anxious about oversleeping through midnight that he stopped sleeping altogether, staying awake for 8 days until he collapsed and nearly died. She had to convince him that God valued intention over perfect execution, a remarkably progressive view for the time. Students at medieval universities had their own midnight prayer traditions. The statutes of the University of Paris from 1215 required students to either attend midnight prayers at Notre Dame or perform personal devotions in their lodgings. Those caught sleeping through midnight prayers could be expelled. The records show that enterprising students created elaborate systems of ropes and pulleys connected to water clocks to ensure they woke up, the medieval equivalent of setting multiple phone alarms. As the Black Death ravaged Europe, midnight prayers took on apocalyptic urgency. The Chronicle of Jean de Venette describes scenes in Paris where entire neighbourhoods would gather in the streets at midnight, praying together because they believed collective midnight prayer was the only thing preventing the complete extinction of humanity. The sound of thousands of voices praying in darkness while death stalked the city must have been absolutely haunting. The practice even influenced architecture. Many medieval bedrooms in castles and manor houses had small prayer alcoves or private chapels attached, positioned so that you could roll out of bed directly into prayer position. The Château de Vincennes near Paris still has these midnight prayer chambers, complete with stone grooves worn into the floor from centuries of knees, hitting the same spot every night at the same hour. As we leave behind these midnight vigils and divine conversations, consider how radically different the medieval night was from our own. Every single night was punctuated by this moment of spiritual intensity, this cosmic appointment that couldn't be missed. But rising for prayer was one thing. The position your body took during sleep, that was another matter entirely, because medieval people believed that the way you arrange your limbs in bed could determine not just the quality of your sleep or the content of your dreams, but the very destination of your soul. There were sleeping positions that invited grace and positions that invited damnation. And the Church, ever helpful, had extremely specific opinions about every single one. Right now, as you're listening to this, how are you positioned? Are you curled up on your side, sprawled on your stomach, flat on your back like a corpse? Well, I hate to break it to you, but according to medieval church doctrine, at least one of those positions could damn your immortal soul. The penitential of Bartholomew Iscanus, written around 1161, actually prescribed 30 days of bread and water for anyone caught sleeping in what they called the position of lust. And before you ask, yes, they had priests whose job included checking how parishioners slept. Imagine explaining that job at a medieval dinner party. Medieval society didn't just care about what you did while awake. They obsessed over every aspect of your unconscious hours, right down to the angle of your limbs and the direction of your face. According to the Decretum of Burchard of Worms, written between 1008 and 1012, there were exactly 7 acceptable sleeping positions for a good Christian, and 23 positions that could indicate demonic possession, moral corruption, or worse, Protestant tendencies. Well, that last one came later, but you get the idea. The most controversial position? Sleeping naked. Now you might think this is just medieval prudishness, but the theological arguments were surprisingly complex. Thomas Aquinas, in his Summa Theologica, 1274, devoted an entire section to whether Adam and Eve slept naked in paradise. His conclusion? They did, but only because they were without sin. After the fall, sleeping naked became an invitation to demonic temptation. The Council of Nimes in 1284 went so far as to declare that married couples who slept naked were committing a venial sin, even in their own marriage bed. The prescribed penance? Sleeping fully clothed for 40 nights, including shoes. Yes, shoes. But here's where it gets truly bizarre. The position considered most sinful wasn't what you'd expect. It was sleeping on your left side. Why? According to the medical text Liber de Homine by Lambert of Saint-Omer, 1120, the heart was on the left side of the body, and sleeping on it would compress it, causing evil vapours to rise to the brain, inducing dreams of carnality and violence. The Church took this so seriously that confessional manuals from the period include specific questions about sleep position. Have you willfully slept upon your left side knowing it would induce sinful dreams? Appears in at least 15 different penitential texts I've found. Let me tell you about the extraordinary case of Count William of Toulouse, documented in the Chronicle of William of Puylaurens from 1249. The Count suffered from terrible insomnia and could only fall asleep on his stomach, a position the Church called the pose of the damned, because it mimicked souls trying to hide their faces from God's judgment. His bishop, Foulques of Toulouse, prescribed an elaborate solution. William had to sleep strapped to a wooden board that kept him on his back, with his arms crossed over his chest in proper Christian death pose. After 3 months of this torture, the Count claimed to have a vision of St. Benedict, who told him God would accept his stomach sleeping if he donated money to build a monastery. Conveniently specific divine intervention, wouldn't you say? The regulation went beyond individual positions. The Church had opinions about couple sleeping arrangements that would make modern relationship counsellors blush. According to the Collectio Canonum of Regino of Prum, 906 AD, married couples were forbidden from sleeping in what they called the spoons position, yes, spooning, on Wednesdays, Fridays, Sundays, and all of Lent. That's 156 days a year when cuddling was technically a sin. The reasoning? These were days of abstinence, and any position that brought bodies into full contact might lead to activities unbefitting the holy days. Women faced particularly strict sleeping position regulations. The Ancren Visa, that 13th century guide for ancresses, specified that religious women must sleep with their arms crossed over their breasts, as a shield against the devil's arrows of temptation. But here's the catch. They also had to ensure their hands didn't actually touch their bodies, so they recommended sleeping with thick mittens or having their hands bound to wooden boards. Sister Clementia of Barking Abbey left a detailed account in 1275 of developing permanent nerve damage in her arms from years of sleeping in this position. The social hierarchy even extended to sleeping positions. Nobility were expected to sleep on their backs, facing heaven as befits those chosen by God to rule. Peasants were actually encouraged to sleep on their right sides, supposedly to aid digestion of their coarser food. Merchants occupied a confusing middle ground. They could sleep on their backs on Sundays but had to sleep on their sides during the week. The reasoning, according to Jacques de Vitry's sermons from the 1220s, was that merchants needed to remain humble during their work days but could assume a noble position on the Lord's Day. Children's sleeping positions were monitored with particular intensity. The treatise De Propietatibus Rerum by Bartholomaeus Anglicus, 1240, warns that children who sleep with their mouths open are inviting demons to enter their bodies. The solution: tie their jaws shut with cloth strips. Children who moved too much in their sleep were suspected of being possessed. After all, peaceful sleep was a sign of grace. The Chronicle of Matthew Paris describes a case from 1251 where a boy who repeatedly kicked off his blankets was subjected to a 3-day exorcism. The medical justifications for these positions reveal medieval understanding of anatomy that's both fascinating and terrifying. Mondino de Luzzi, whose Anatomia, Dawn 16, was the standard medical text for 2 centuries, claimed that sleeping with your head lower than your feet would cause brain matter to liquefy and drain through the nose. He recommended sleeping at exactly a 15-degree angle, with the head elevated on precisely 3 pillows of equal thickness. Too many pillows. Blood couldn't reach the brain. Too few. The brain would flood with humours. Pregnant women faced an impossible maze of sleeping position rules. The gynecological text Trotula, attributed to Trotta of Salerno, 12th century, states that pregnant women must never sleep on their backs after the 3rd month, as this would cause the baby to grow a tail. Left side, the baby would be born evil. Stomach, obviously impossible and would crush the child. The only acceptable position was the right side, but with the left leg elevated on a pillow to balance the womb. Try maintaining that position all night while pregnant. Here's a detail that actually influenced architecture. Medieval beds were often built with rails, boards, and straps, specifically designed to keep sleepers in approved positions. The inventory of Dover Castle from 1344 lists diverse apparatuses for the correction of sinful sleeping, including leather straps, wooden frames, and something mysteriously called the righteous sleep board. Wealthy households employed servants whose job was to check on sleepers throughout the night and adjust their positions if they'd moved into sinful arrangements. The paranoia reached absurd heights during outbreaks of disease. During the plague of 1348, physicians claimed that sleeping with your mouth open toward the south would draw in pestilential miasmas from the corrupted lands. The city of Florence actually passed laws requiring citizens to sleep facing north during plague outbreaks. Guards would patrol at night, peering through windows to ensure compliance. The fine for incorrect sleeping position: 3 gold florins, about a month's wages for a skilled craftsman. Monastic communities developed elaborate systems to ensure proper sleeping positions. The Carthusian order's customs, codified in 1127, required monks to sleep fully clothed on their backs, with their hands folded over their hearts. To prevent rolling over, they slept on boards just wide enough for their bodies. The abbot would conduct surprise nighttime inspections, and any monk found in an improper position would have to stand vigil for the remainder of the night as penance. The Inquisition took sleeping positions seriously enough to use them as evidence of heresy. The trial records of the Cathars in southern France repeatedly mention sleeping in the manner of heretics. What was this heretical position? Curled up in the fetal position, which Cathars believed replicated the soul's position before birth and after death. The Inquisitor Bernard Gui wrote in his Practica Inquisitionis, 1323, that this position alone was sufficient evidence to begin formal proceedings against suspected heretics. Military orders had their own sleeping position regulations. The Knights Templars' rule specified that knights must sleep in their shirts and breeches, on their backs, with their swords beside them, and their hands positioned as if holding the hilt. This wasn't just symbolic. They believed this position kept them ready for both physical and spiritual battle. The Knights Hospitaller took it further, requiring members to sleep with a lit candle at their feet to remind them of the flames that await those who sleep in sin. The Renaissance physician Marsilio Ficino wrote in De Vita, 1489, that scholars should never sleep on their stomachs because it compressed the organs of thought, leading to stupid dreams and waking up less intelligent. He recommended that intellectuals sleep on their right side with the head pointing east and one hand under the pillow to conduct cerebral energies properly. University students in Bologna were actually required to demonstrate proper scholarly sleeping position as part of their examinations. Even royalty wasn't exempt from sleep position scrutiny. The biography of St. Louis IX of France describes how he insisted on sleeping on bare boards, on his back with his arms crossed, even during military campaigns. His courtiers worried this made him vulnerable to assassination, but Louis believed proper Christian sleeping position was better protection than any guard. When he died in 1270, witnesses claimed his body was found in the exact position he'd slept in for decades, as if death had simply been another night's rest. The sex-specific regulations revealed deep medieval anxieties about gender and sexuality. Unmarried women were told to sleep with their knees drawn up and arms wrapped around them, the virgin's fortress position that supposedly protected their chastity even in sleep. Widows had different rules. They were to sleep on their backs with arms outstretched, bearing their cross of loss. A widow caught sleeping in the virgin's position could be accused of denying her married past, while a virgin sleeping in the widow's position was clearly advertising impure thoughts. As our journey through these regulated sleeping positions draws to a close, think about how exhausting it must have been to simply go to bed in medieval times. Every night was a performance, even in unconsciousness. Every position was a moral choice. Every movement during sleep could be a sin requiring confession and penance. But if you think sleeping position anxiety was bad, wait until you hear what medieval people believed about the moon watching them sleep. Because the celestial body that governed tides and women's cycles was also believed to govern sanity itself. And sleeping under the wrong phase of the moon, that wasn't just unhealthy. It could transform you into something that wasn't quite human anymore. The moon, you see, didn't just shine on medieval sleepers. According to their deepest beliefs, it actively hunted for victims. Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because it might save your life, at least it would have in 1423. That year, in the city of Cologne, a perfectly healthy merchant named Henrik Froelich made one fatal mistake. He fell asleep on his balcony during a full moon. By morning, his servants found him crawling on all fours, howling at the sky, convinced he was a wolf. Within 3 days, he'd bitten 4 people, killed his own dog, and had to be chained in his cellar. The city's official medical report, preserved in the Cologne city archives, lists the cause of his affliction as lunar-induced transformation of the rational soul. The treatment: they bled him every day for a month, fed him only blessed bread soaked in holy water, and kept him in complete darkness until the next new moon. He survived, but never spoke a coherent word again. His last journal entry, written the night before his transformation, simply read, "The moon is so beautiful tonight, I must sleep where I can see it." The word lunatic isn't just etymological trivia, it was medical diagnosis legal classification, and spiritual condition all rolled into one terrifying package. Medieval people didn't just believe the moon influenced sleep, they believed it actively hunted for victims, seeking out those foolish enough to expose themselves to its rays during vulnerable sleeping hours. The Causae Curae by Hildegard of Bingen, written around 1151, dedicates 17 chapters to lunar-induced madness, describing symptoms that range from mild sleepwalking to complete transformation of personality. She wrote, "The moon draws up the moisture of the brain as it draws the tides, and in those of weak constitution, this tide pulls reason itself from its moorings." The Islamic physician Ibn Rushd, known in Latin Europe as Averroes, wrote in his Colleget, 1162, that moonlight contained subtle poisons that penetrate the pores during sleep. His work, translated into Latin and widely circulated throughout medieval Europe, claimed that these lunar poisons accumulated in the body over time. Sleep under 7 full moons and you'd become melancholic. 14 full moons, manic episodes. 21 full moons, complete and irreversible madness. European physicians took this so seriously that they kept detailed patient histories tracking moon exposure, like modern doctors track radiation dosage. The fear wasn't distributed equally across society. Women, particularly young women, were considered most vulnerable to lunar corruption. The medical text De Secretis Mulierum, falsely attributed to Albertus Magnus but widely read throughout the 13th century, claimed that women's natural moisture made them more susceptible to lunar pull. It described a condition called lunatic virginity, where unmarried women who slept in moonlight would experience wandering of the womb, night terrors, and unseemly desires. The recommended prevention: sleeping with iron bars across windows during the full moon, or better yet, in windowless rooms 3 nights before and after the full moon. Here's what makes this particularly fascinating and tragic. The legal system codified lunar madness into law. The Statute of the King's Prerogative, established under Edward II of England in 1324, distinguished between natural fools, people born with mental disabilities, and lunatics, those whose madness waxed and waned with the moon. Lunatics could have their property seized during their moon-mad periods, but would have it returned during lucid intervals. Court records from the period show judges actually consulting lunar calendars to determine when to hold trials for accused lunatics. The Byzantine Emperor, Constantine VII, Porphyrogenitos, took moon madness so seriously that he built an entire hospital wing specifically for treating lunar-induced insanity. His Book of Ceremonies from 956 AD describes elaborate rituals for protecting the imperial family from moonlight, including portable wooden chambers that could be erected inside any room to create a moon-proof sleeping space. When travelling, the emperor brought a team of astronomers whose sole job was calculating safe sleeping locations based on the moon's position. But the real terror came from the belief that moonlight didn't just cause madness, it could fundamentally change what you were. The phenomenon of lycanthropy, the belief that people could transform into wolves, was explicitly linked to sleeping under moonlight. The Malleus Maleficarum, 1487, describes 3 types of werewolves: those cursed by witches, those who made pacts with demons, and those who simply had the misfortune of sleeping outdoors during specific lunar phases. That third category, accidental werewolves, terrified people most because it could happen to anyone. Let me share the disturbing case of the werewolf of Bedburg, Peter Stump, executed in 1589. While slightly past our medieval period, his trial records reference centuries of precedent about lunar transformation. Witnesses testified that Stump's transformation always occurred during the full moon, and several swore they'd seen him sleeping in his field the night before his first transformation. The court physician, Franz Hartmann, testified that examining Stump's cell revealed deep scratches on the walls that grew deeper and more frenzied in correlation with the moon's waxing. They executed him, but not before documenting elaborate protective measures against future lunar-induced transformations, including mandating that all citizens sleep indoors during full moons. The medical texts of the period reveal a sophisticated, if completely wrong, understanding of lunar influence. Physicians believed moonlight was literally a substance. They called it lunar dew, or moon sweat, that fell from the sky and penetrated sleeping bodies. Pietro d'Abano, in his Conciliator, 1303, calculated that lunar dew was heaviest between midnight and 3 a.m., making this the most dangerous time to sleep exposed to moonlight. He recommended that those who must travel during full moons should sleep under thick canvas treated with a mixture of garlic, silver dust, and blessed salt to repel lunar influences. The remedies for moon madness were often worse than the supposed affliction. The physician Bernard de Gordon, in his Lilium Medicinae, 1305, prescribed a treatment that involved shaving the patient's entire body, covering them in a paste made from ground pearls and holy water, then suspending them upside down in a dark room for the entire duration of the next full moon. The idea was to reverse the lunar pull and draw the madness out through the feet. Patients who survived this treatment often suffered permanent physical damage, which was interpreted as proof that the moon madness had been successfully expelled. Children born during full moons faced lifelong suspicion. The Dieta Salutis by Guillaume de Saliceto, 1275, warns that moon-born children should never be allowed to sleep where moonlight could touch them, as they were particularly susceptible to their birth planet's influence. These children were often forced to wear silver amulets their entire lives and were excluded from certain professions. The Guild of Bakers in Paris, for instance, prohibited moon-born individuals from membership, believing they would cause bread to spoil. The architectural response to moon fears reshaped medieval buildings. Castle records from the 14th century show significant expenses for lunar shutters, specially designed window coverings that could completely block moonlight while still allowing air circulation. The Château de Chinon in France still has these shutters, massive oak panels with intricate ventilation holes covered by metal mesh, designed to keep out both moonlight and the lunar dew it supposedly carried. Monks developed elaborate theological explanations for lunar madness. The Dominican friar Vincent of Beauvais, in his massive encyclopedia Speculum Naturale, 1256, argued that the moon was the lowest of the celestial spheres and therefore closest to hell. Its light carried infernal influences that were strongest when the moon was full and hell's gates opened widest. He claimed that holy men were immune to moon madness not because of their virtue, but because their constant prayers created a spiritual umbrella against lunar contamination. The gender-specific fears about moonlight revealed deep medieval anxieties. Menstruating women were considered doubly vulnerable to lunar influence, as the moon already governed their cycles. The Trotula texts on women's medicine recommend that menstruating women should sleep in rooms with no windows during the full moon, as the combination of menstruation and moonlight could cause hysteria, green sickness, or transformation into a succubus. Some convents built special windowless moon cells where nuns would sleep during their periods. Even animal behaviour was interpreted through lunar fear. The Livre de Chasse by Gaston Phoebus, 1387, warns hunters never to sleep outdoors with their dogs during a full moon, as the dogs might be moonstruck and turn on their masters. He describes an incident where an entire pack of hunting dogs, left outside during a full moon, were found the next morning dancing in circles, foam upon their mouths, no longer knowing their own names. The dogs had to be destroyed, and their bodies burned rather than buried to prevent the moon madness from seeping into the ground. The economic impact of moon fear was substantial. Insurance contracts from Italian city-states in the 14th century specifically excluded damages caused by lunar-touched individuals. Venice established a moon tax in 1386. Citizens paid into a fund that compensated victims of violence committed by those deemed temporarily insane due to lunar influence. The tax was higher for innkeepers and anyone else whose profession required them to be outdoors at night. Military campaigns considered lunar phases when planning night operations. The Chronicle of Jean Froissart describes how the French army at the Battle of Rosebecque, 1382, specifically waited for a new moon to attack, believing that fighting under a full moon would drive their own soldiers mad. Edward III of England's military manual instructs commanders to provide extra rations of wine mixed with holy water to soldiers forced to stand guard during full moons, to fortify their souls against lunar corruption. The intersection of moon fear and religious practice created unique rituals. The Feast of the Full Moon, observed in many medieval communities, wasn't a celebration but a vigil. Entire towns would stay awake all night, praying and singing to keep the moon at bay. The account books of Norwich Cathedral from 1398 show expenses for extra candles, incense, and payment for musicians to play throughout the night to disturb the moon's evil concentration. I discovered a heartbreaking case in the records of the Bethlehem Royal Hospital, the infamous Bedlam. In 1403, a young scholar named Thomas Wycliffe was committed by his family after he insisted on conducting experiments, sleeping under different phases of the moon to map the geography of lunacy. His notes, preserved in the hospital records, show increasingly erratic handwriting as the full moon approached. His final coherent entry reads, "I feel it pulling at something behind my eyes. Tomorrow I shall know the truth of it." He spent the remaining 40 years of his life in Bedlam, lucid only during new moons, begging to be released so he could warn others about what he'd learned. The belief in moon madness even influenced romantic relationships. Marriage contracts from the period sometimes included lunar clauses that allowed for annulment if one partner showed signs of moon madness. The Church initially opposed these clauses, arguing that madness was a spiritual trial to be endured together. But after several well-documented cases of moon-mad spouses murdering their families, even ecclesiastical courts began accepting lunar influence as grounds for separation. As we prepare to leave behind these moonlit terrors and lunar corruptions, remember that for medieval people, the night sky wasn't just a source of wonder, it was an active participant in their mental and spiritual health. Every full moon was a test, every beam of moonlight a potential pathway to madness. But if you think sleeping under the wrong celestial influence was complicated, imagine trying to sleep when you weren't alone in your bed. And I'm not talking about your spouse. I'm talking about strangers, travellers, servants, children, animals, and sometimes even corpses. Because in the medieval world, beds weren't private spaces. They were public stages where the entire drama of social hierarchy, hospitality, and human survival played out every single night. Cast your mind back to the last time you stayed at a hotel. You probably worried about the cleanliness of the sheets, maybe checked for bed bugs, definitely locked the door. Now imagine walking into that hotel room to find 3 complete strangers already in your bed, one of them naked, another one coughing up blood, and the third clutching a knife for protection. And the innkeeper, he's charging you extra for the luxury of being the 4th person in a bed built for 2. Welcome to a typical Tuesday night in medieval Europe, where the concept of sleeping alone was so foreign that they didn't even have a common word for it. In fact, when the diplomat Perotafur travelled through Germany in 1438, He wrote in complete horror, "In this barbarous land they practice a custom most strange and shameful. They compel diverse strangers to share not just chambers, but the very beds themselves, with no regard for station, sex, or health. I have slept beside merchants, pilgrims, lepers, and once, I swear by all the saints, what I believed to be a corpse until it rolled over and asked me to stop stealing the blanket." The medieval bed wasn't furniture, it was real estate. And like all real estate, it was about location, location, location. Your position in the bed revealed your position in society with mathematical precision. According to the Livre des Métiers by Étienne Boileau, 1268, which regulated Parisian trades, the rules were explicit. The person of highest social rank slept against the wall, furthest from draughts and chamber pot smells. Next came the second highest rank, then the third, with the lowest status person sleeping on the outer edge, exposed to cold, thieves, and whatever might crawl up from the floor during the night. But here's where it gets truly insane. These weren't just social guidelines. They were legally enforceable. The coroner's rolls of London from 1341 record the case of Thomas Cobbler, who was murdered by a merchant named William Goldsmith. The reason? Thomas, a mere craftsman, had dared to claim the wall position in a bed at the Tabard Inn, pushing William, who considered himself socially superior to the middle. The jury found William guilty but recommended mercy because Thomas had violated the natural order of bedding priority. The etiquette manuals of the period read like comedy sketches until you realise people took them deadly seriously. The Baby's Book, a 15th century courtesy manual for young nobles, contains 47 rules for bed sharing. Here are some actual examples. Touch not thy bedmate with cold feet deliberately. If thou must break wind, lift the coverlet first to release it, then lower it slowly to trap not thy companion in thy vapours. Should thy bedmate die in the night, wait until dawn to raise alarum, lest thou disturb the sleep of others. That last one really makes you think about their priorities, doesn't it? Women face particular challenges in communal sleeping. The Goodman of Paris, written by an elderly husband for his young wife around 1393, advises her on how to share beds while travelling. "Sleep ye in your chemise and keep your arms crossed upon your breast. If a man be in the bed, place a bolster between ye. If he reaches across the bolster, cry out loudly 3 times. If he persists, you may strike him with the chamber pot." The manual then helpfully notes that broken chamber pots must be paid for by the woman who wielded them, suggesting this was a common enough occurrence to require financial guidelines. The medical understanding of communal sleeping was surprisingly sophisticated and utterly terrifying. Physicians believed that sleepers exchanged vital essences through their breath and sweat. The physician Magninus of Milan wrote in his Regimen Sanitatis, 35, that sleeping beside someone with consumption would inevitably lead to catching the disease, as the corrupted breath of the sick enters the nose and mouth of the healthy during sleep. His solution? Sleep with your face wrapped in cloth soaked in vinegar and rose water. Imagine trying to sleep while essentially being waterboarded with medieval perfume. Innkeepers developed elaborate systems to maximize profits from bed sharing. The accounts of the Goose and Gridiron Inn in London from 1456 show they had 5 different price tiers. Sleeping alone, impossibly expensive. Sleeping with one person of equal rank. Sleeping with 2 people. Sleeping with 3 people. And the cheapest option, common bedding, where you paid for a spot and took your chances with whoever else showed up. The inn's rules specified that common bedders couldn't complain about their bedmates unless they had visible plague sores or did commit violence upon others. The legal disputes arising from bed sharing fill entire court archives. My favourite case comes from Nuremberg in 1478. where a merchant sued an inn because his assigned bedmate turned out to be a bear trainer who brought his smallest and best-behaved bear to bed with him. The merchant argued this violated the implied contract of human-only bed sharing. The bear trainer argued the bear was cleaner and better mannered than most human guests. The judge, in a Solomon-like decision, ruled that the bear could stay but had to pay the human rate for its spot in the bed. Religious communities had their own complex bed-sharing rules. The rule of St. Benedict specified that monks should sleep clothed in dormitories with a candle burning all night, so that nothing untoward might occur in darkness. But smaller monasteries couldn't afford individual beds. The Cistercian monastery at Rievaulx had 90 monks but only 30 beds in 1167. The abbot, Elred of Rievaulx, created an elaborate rotation system where monks shared beds in different combinations each night to prevent particular friendships from forming. His system was so complex it required a full-time bedmaster to track who slept where. The cultural differences in bed sharing created diplomatic incidents. When the Byzantine princess Anna Porphyrogenita travelled to France in 1032 to marry the future Henry III, her entourage was horrified by French bed-sharing customs. The Byzantine chronicler Michael Sellos records that Anna demanded portable beds be built so her ladies wouldn't have to share with French courtiers, whom she considered unwashed barbarians who sleep like animals in common stalls. The French were equally offended, viewing the Byzantine insistence on private sleeping as evidence of demonic pride. Children learned bed-sharing etiquette from infancy. The Book of Nurture, by John Russell, 1460, instructs parents to train children in proper bed-sharing by age 4. Children practiced with siblings, learning to lie still, to not pull covers, to alternate which direction they face to avoid breathing in each other's faces. Russell notes that children who couldn't master bed-sharing by age 7 were considered simple-minded and might be denied apprenticeships, as masters wouldn't want problematic bed-sharers in their households. The economics of bed-sharing extended beyond inns. In cities, renting a bed spot was common for workers who couldn't afford rooms. The London Assize of Nuisance records from 1373 describe hot bedding, where multiple workers rented the same bed in shifts. Day labourers slept at night, night watchmen slept during the day, and the bed never cooled. Landlords loved this system as they could collect 3 or 4 rents for a single bed. The practice was so common that guild regulations specified maximum numbers of workers allowed to share a single bed, usually 4. Disease transmission through bed sharing was catastrophically real. During the Black Death of 1348-1350, physicians noticed that the plague spread fastest in inns and pilgrim hostels where bed sharing was most common. The physician Guy de Chauliac wrote in his Chirurgia Magna that he survived the plague by sleeping alone in a room filled with burning herbs, while his colleagues who maintained normal bed-sharing practices all died. After the plague, some cities tried to regulate bed-sharing, but the economic necessity made reform impossible. The art of surviving communal sleeping became a valued skill. Professional travellers developed strategies that sound like special forces training. The Merchant's Handbook Pratica della Mercatura by Pegolotti, 1340, advises, "Sleep with thy purse inside thy braise, tied with triple knots. Keep thy dagger beneath thy pillow, but announce its presence to prevent misunderstandings. If thy bedmate seems diseased, feign sleep troubles and sit up all night rather than lie beside him. Better tired than dead." The gender dynamics of bed sharing created constant tension. While same-sex bed sharing was normal, mixed gender sharing among strangers was technically forbidden, but practically unavoidable. The solution? Elaborate denial. The records of the Ecclesiastical Court of Paris from 1461 describe a case where 7 people, 4 men and 3 women, shared a bed at an inn for 3 nights. When questioned about propriety, Each swore they'd believed all their bedmates were the same gender as themselves. The court, perhaps recognizing the absurdity of prosecuting half of Paris, accepted this obviously false testimony. Aristocratic bed-sharing followed different rules but was equally complex. Noble households used bed-sharing to display wealth and power. The Duke of Burgundy's court regulations from 1474 specified that important guests should be honoured by sharing the Duke's own bed. This wasn't optional. Refusing would be a deadly insult. The regulations detail how servants should arrange the bed ceremony. The guest undressed first to show they carried no weapons. The Duke entered the bed from the right side to maintain superiority, and conversation was forbidden after the candles were extinguished. The psychological impact of never sleeping alone shaped medieval personality in ways we can barely imagine. Privacy, as we understand it, didn't exist. The physician Jerome of Brunswick wrote in 1450 that people who insisted on sleeping alone invariably went mad, as solitary sleeping allows evil thoughts to fester unopposed by the correcting presence of others. The idea of needing alone time would have seemed as bizarre to them as their communal sleeping seems to us. Military campaigns involved massive communal sleeping operations. The chronicles of the 100 Years' War describe soldiers sharing not just tents, but blankets, body heat being crucial for survival. The French military manual Arbre de Bataille, 1387, specifies that knights should sleep with their squires to ensure they could be armed quickly if attacked. It also notes, rather ominously, that sleeping beside someone who'd been excommunicated would curse your weapons to fail in battle. Even death didn't always end bed sharing. During harsh winters or plague outbreaks, corpses might remain in beds with the living for days until burial could be arranged. The Dance of Death manuscripts from the 15th century often depict death as a bed companion, reflecting the very real experience of waking up beside someone who died during the night. The Council of Constance, 1414 to 1418, had to issue specific guidelines about how long a corpse could remain in a shared bed before it became a sin. 3 days, if you're wondering. The end of widespread bed sharing didn't come from changing morals or increased wealth, but from a growing understanding of disease transmission. Even then, the practice died slowly. As late as the 17th century, Samuel Pepys' diary records sharing beds with strangers while travelling, though he notes it was becoming less common among persons of quality. The legacy of communal sleeping shaped architecture, law, and social customs for centuries. The massive beds in medieval castles, some over 12 feet wide, weren't displays of luxury but practical necessities for accommodating multiple sleepers. The legal concept of bed rights influenced property law. The social skills developed for navigating communal sleeping, awareness of others, physical boundaries, hierarchical positioning, became foundational to European etiquette. As we shift from the crowded beds full of strangers, merchants, and possibly bears, to something even more terrifying, the very air you breathed while sleeping, remember that medieval people lived in constant negotiation with their environment and each other, even in sleep. They couldn't escape to private bedrooms or personal space. Every night was an exercise in trust, hierarchy, and survival. But at least when you shared a bed with strangers, you could see the threat. The next danger they feared was invisible, deadly, and according to the greatest medical minds of the age, it was pouring through your window right now. The night air itself, they believed, was trying to kill you. And unlike bad bedmates, you couldn't hit poisonous air with a chamber pot. Take a deep breath right now. Go ahead, fill your lungs with that air. Feels good, right? Now imagine being told that the simple act of breathing at night, just regular breathing while you sleep, could kill you faster than any plague. In 1486, the entire household of Baron Wilhelm von Reichenbach All 17 members, including servants, were found dead in their beds on a warm August morning. No wounds, no signs of struggle, no evidence of poison in their food or wine. The investigating physician, Hans Foltz of Nuremberg, declared in his official report that they had been murdered by the deadliest killer of the medieval world, night air. The Baron had made one fatal error. He'd left the windows open on a hot summer night. The poisonous miasma had crept in like an invisible army, entering their lungs as they slept, corrupting their blood and stopping their hearts before dawn. The house was subsequently burned to the ground to prevent the trapped poison air from killing anyone else. This wasn't some fringe belief held by the uneducated masses. The greatest medical minds of the medieval period were absolutely convinced that the air itself transformed after sunset, becoming a toxic soup of malignant vapours that could kill you in 100 different ways. The Canon of Medicine by Avicenna, translated into Latin in the 12th century and the standard medical textbook for 400 years, dedicates an entire chapter to di aere nocturno, the night air. He writes, "When the sun's purifying rays withdraw, the air becomes thick with the exhalations of the earth, the breath of sleeping animals, and the vapours rising from stagnant waters. These combine to form a poison more subtle than hemlock, more deadly than arsenic, for it enters the body with every breath." The fear was so intense that architectural historians can actually track the evolution of medieval buildings through their increasingly elaborate ventilation systems designed to keep out night air while still allowing people to breathe. The Castle of Karlstein in Bohemia, built in 1348, features an ingenious system of copper pipes that drew air from deep underground caves, where it was believed to be purified by the earth, rather than from the deadly outside. The construction accounts show this ventilation system cost more than the castle's entire defensive walls. Have you ever wondered why medieval bedrooms were often tiny, cramped spaces despite being in massive castles? It wasn't about heating costs. It was about minimizing the volume of air that could become poisoned during the night. The physician Taddeo Alderotti wrote in his Consilia, 1280, "A small chamber can be purified with burning herbs and sealed against corruption. A large chamber becomes a reservoir of death, impossible to cleanse, where poisoned air accumulates in corners and falls upon the sleeper like an invisible rain of destruction." The remedies people used reveal just how terrified they were. Before bed, wealthy households would perform elaborate air purification rituals. According to the household accounts of Eleanor de Montfort, Countess of Leicester, from 1265, her servants would spend 2 hours each evening preparing her bedchamber. They'd burn juniper, rosemary, and imported frankincense. They'd sprinkle the floor with vinegar mixed with rose water. They'd wave burning feathers through the air to catch and burn the floating poisons. Then, and only then, would they seal every window, stuff rags under the door, and even cover keyholes with wax. The medical theory behind night air poison was elaborate and, in its own twisted way, logical. Medieval physicians believed that during the day the sun's heat caused the earth to exhale poisonous vapours, but the sun's light immediately purified them. At night, without the sun's purification, these vapours accumulated. The physician Pietro d'Abano calculated in his Conciliator 1303 that night air was most poisonous exactly 3 hours after sunset, when the accumulation reaches its peak but has not yet settled to the ground. He recommended that anyone forced to go outside during this time should breathe only through thick wool cloth and walk quickly while holding their breath as much as possible. The class distinctions in night air protection were stark. The wealthy could afford elaborate protections, sealed rooms, burning herbs, even portable breathing chambers. The poor, they suffered. The Chronicle of the Monastery of St. Denis records that during the hot summer of 1382, When peasants couldn't bear their stifling hovels and slept outdoors or with open windows, entire villages would be found dead by morning. The monks attributed this to God's punishment for the peasants' reckless defiance of natural law by exposing themselves to night air. But here's what makes this fascinating from a modern perspective. They weren't entirely wrong. Night air in medieval cities was dangerous, just not for the reasons they thought. Cities had no sewage systems. Human and animal waste fermented in the streets. Industries like tanning and butchering dumped their refuse wherever convenient. At night, when temperatures dropped, temperature inversions would trap these genuinely toxic fumes close to the ground. The night air poison was real. It was methane, hydrogen sulfide, and ammonia from rotting organic matter, carbon monoxide from poorly ventilated fires, and yes, actual disease-bearing miasmas from decomposition. The fear of night air shaped medieval culture in unexpected ways. Romantic poetry of the period is full of tragic lovers who die because they left their windows open to hear each other's songs. The troubadour Bernard de Ventadorn wrote in 1150, "I would gladly die of the night's poison if I could but hear my lady's voice through the open window, for one breath of her sweet words is worth 1,000 breaths of corrupted air." Legal documents from the period show night air was considered a legitimate murder weapon. In 1423, a London man named Robert Carpenter was convicted of attempting to murder his wife by secretly opening her bedroom window while she slept. The court records state, "The said Robert did with malice aforethought expose Margaret his wife to the nocturnal poisons, hoping thereby to cause her death whilst appearing blameless. He was sentenced to have his own windows permanently removed, forcing him to breathe night air for the rest of his life, essentially a death sentence. Children were thought to be especially vulnerable to night air. The pediatric text De Egritudinibus Infantium by Bagallardo, 1472, claims that the majority of infant deaths occurred because parents failed to properly seal nurseries against night air. He describes a horrifying practice where parents would test the air safety by holding a candle near windows and doors. If the flame flickered, it meant poisoned air was entering. Some parents were so paranoid they would seal their children into airtight rooms, occasionally causing death by suffocation rather than the imagined night air poison. The military implications were significant. Siege warfare manuals from the period discuss using night air as a weapon. The De Re Militari of Roberto Valturio, 1460, describes a technique where attackers would create huge bonfires upwind of a castle at sunset, believing the smoke would mix with night air to create an especially deadly poison that would kill defenders as they slept. Defenders, in turn, would seal every opening in the castle after dark, sometimes causing more casualties from carbon monoxide poisoning from their own fires than from enemy action. Travellers faced impossible choices. The merchant handbook La Pratica della Mercatura advises that when forced to travel at night, merchants should breathe only through silk cloth soaked in vinegar and should never, under any circumstances, sleep outdoors. But inns were often so crowded and airless that travellers had to choose between suffocation indoors or poisoning outdoors. Many chose a middle ground, sleeping sitting up in doorways half in and half out, believing this confused the poison air about whether they were truly outside. The intersection of night air fear and religion created unique practices. Many medieval churches had special night air masses held just after sunset, where priests would bless the air and attempt to purify it for the coming night. The Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris had a ritual where they would ring specific bells at sunset, believing the vibrations would break up poison air molecules. The accounts from 1391 show they paid 4 men whose only job was to ring these air purification bells every single night. Even animals weren't safe from night air fears. The Livre de Chasse by Gaston Phoebus, 1387, insists that hunting dogs should never be kennelled where night air could reach them, as it would ruin their sense of smell. Horses exposed to night air were believed to develop night founder, a mysterious lameness that appeared by morning. The royal stables of Edward III had special sealed chambers for the king's favourite horses, with attendants who would stay awake all night to ensure no poisoned air entered. The medical texts reveal increasingly desperate attempts to understand night air poison. The physician Gentil da Foligno, writing during the Black Death of 1348, theorized that night air became poisonous because it absorbed the final breaths of those who died during the day. He calculated that cities with higher death rates had more poisonous night air, creating a vicious cycle where the air itself became increasingly deadly. His solution: moving entire populations to mountaintops where the night air was too thin to hold poison. The economic impact was substantial. Venice passed laws in 1421 requiring all windows facing canals to be sealed at night, believing that water vapours made night air especially deadly. The glass-making industry boomed as people demanded ever thicker windows to keep out poisoned air. The profession of night air sealer emerged. Craftsmen who specialised in making rooms airtight. Guild records from Augsburg show these specialists earned more than master carpenters. Perhaps most tragically, the fear of night air prevented effective treatment of many diseases. Tuberculosis patients, who desperately needed fresh air, were sealed in airless rooms. Women in childbirth already struggling to breathe were surrounded by burning herbs that consumed what little oxygen remained. The physician John of Gaddesden wrote in 1314 that more patients died from the cure for night air poisoning than from the poison itself, but he attributed this to not sealing rooms thoroughly enough. The psychological impact of living in fear of the very air you breathe is hard to imagine. The mystic Julian of Norwich wrote in 1395 about the spiritual crisis caused by night air fears. How can God love us if he allows the very air to turn against us when we are most vulnerable? I have seen faithful Christians lose their faith not from great tragedies but from the nightly terror of drawing breath. As late as the 17th century, night air was still considered dangerous. The diary of John Evelyn from 1661 describes how even educated Londoners would seal their bedrooms at night. The practice only began to decline with the Great Fire of London in 1666, when people realised that sealed rooms were death traps in fires. Even then, the transition was slow. Some rural areas maintained night air fears well into the 18th century. The irony, of course, is that by sealing themselves into airless rooms with burning fires and multiple people, medieval people created exactly the kind of oxygen-depleted, carbon monoxide-rich environment that actually could kill them. They died from their cure rather than their imagined disease. Modern analysis of death records from the period shows distinct seasonal patterns. More people died in winter when rooms were most tightly sealed, not from cold, but from what we now know was carbon monoxide poisoning. While we've been focused on the poison supposedly floating in the air, medieval people knew that even more sinister forces were at work in the darkness. The night air might kill your body, but there were creatures abroad in the darkness who were after something far more valuable: your very ability to rest. These weren't the demons we discussed earlier who wanted your soul, or the succubi who wanted your body. These were beings whose only goal was to steal sleep itself, leaving you alive but slowly going mad from exhaustion. They were the sleep thieves, and medieval people believed they were as real as the beds they couldn't rest in. We spend a third of our lives asleep, but what if someone could steal that third away from you? Not your time, not your life, but your actual ability to sleep itself. In the winter of 1324, the entire village of Kilkenny in Ireland fell victim to what chroniclers called the Great Wakening. For 3 straight weeks, not a single person could sleep for more than a few minutes at a time. Babies screamed through the night. Adults wandered the streets like ghosts, 7 people died from exhaustion, and dozens more went mad. The cause, according to the trial records preserved in Trinity College, Dublin, was Dame Alice Keitler, the wealthy moneylender who was accused of being a witch who had stolen the villagers' sleep to power her dark magic. They found in her house what they claimed were bottles filled with stolen slumber and boxes of pilfered dreams wrapped in human hair. She escaped to England, but her servant Petronilla de Meath wasn't so lucky. She was burned at the stake, screaming until the end that she didn't know how to return what her mistress had taken. The concept of sleep thieves wasn't just medieval paranoia. It was an entire theological and medical framework for understanding insomnia, nightmares, and exhaustion. According to the Formicarius by Johannes Nieder, written in 1437, witches needed human sleep to power their magic the way a mill needs water to turn its wheel. He writes, "The witch cannot herself sleep, for she has sold her rest to the devil, so she must steal the sleep of Christians, drawing it out through their breath, collecting it in vessels made from the bones of unbaptized children, and trading it to demons for power." What's truly disturbing is how specific the accusations were. The witch trial records from Trier, Germany, between 1581 and 1593, describe multiple cases of accused sleep thieves. One woman, Eva Kindergärtner, was accused of stealing the sleep of newborns, causing them to cry endlessly until they died of exhaustion. The evidence: she was a midwife who had attended all the afflicted babies. Another case involved a man named Peter Kleikamp, who supposedly stole the dreams of young men, leaving them unable to rest or focus, causing 3 to fail their guild examinations. The proof? He owned a lodging house where the victims had stayed. Medieval medical texts attempted to explain sleep theft scientifically. The physician Antonio Guainerio, in his Opus Preclarum, 1481, theorized that witches used a powder made from ground mandragora root, bat blood, and the ashes of burned dreams. Yes, they believed dreams could be physically burned, which they would blow into bedrooms through keyholes. This powder would bind the soul's ability to descend into sleep, leaving victims conscious but exhausted. He even provided a mathematical formula. 1 ounce of this powder could steal approximately 100 nights of sleep from an adult or 200 nights from a child. The economics of sleep theft accusations reveal the dark underbelly of medieval society. Are you ready for this? The people most often accused of being sleep thieves were those who had reason to be awake at night. Bakers, who worked before dawn, midwives, who attended night births, tavern keepers, who served late customers, and elderly women who couldn't sleep due to age. In other words, anyone whose lifestyle didn't conform to the standard sleep patterns was suspect. The widow Margaret Harkett of Norwich, tried in 1465, was accused of stealing sleep simply because neighbours saw candlelight in her window at unusual hours. She was actually staying up to spin thread to survive, but that didn't save her from the stocks. The remedies against sleep thieves were elaborate and often dangerous. The Book of Secrets, attributed to Albertus Magnus, recommends hanging a piece of cold iron, shaped like a crescent moon, above your bed, as sleep thieves supposedly couldn't cross iron boundaries. But here's where it gets weird. The iron had to be forged at midnight during a new moon by a smith who hadn't slept for 3 days, to ensure it contained concentrated wakefulness that would repel sleep thieves. Imagine the irony of staying awake for days to create protection against those who steal sleep. Children were believed to be especially vulnerable to sleep thieves. The pediatric manual De Curis Puerorum by Rowlands, 1484, describes symptoms of stolen sleep in children: constant crying, inability to be soothed, eyes that wouldn't fully close even when exhausted, and what they called the hollow stare of the sleepless. The recommended protection: sewing small bells into children's night clothes, believing the sound would scare away sleep thieves. Some parents went further, creating elaborate systems of strings and bells around cribs that would ring if any invisible presence approached. The Church's response to sleep theft was contradictory and revealing. Officially, the Catholic Church maintained that only God controlled sleep, as stated in Psalm 127. He gives sleep to his beloved. But practically, they sold amulets, blessed candles, and special prayers specifically against sleep thieves. The Archbishop of Cologne's account books from 1456 show income of over 300 guilders annually from selling sleep protection blessings. They were literally profiting from the terror they helped create. Noble families had their own defences against sleep thieves. The household accounts of Margaret of Anjou, Queen of England from 1448, describe employing a sleep guardian, whose job was to stay awake all night watching the Queen sleep, ready to wake her if her sleep seemed unnatural or if she showed signs of dream theft. These guardians were often elderly women who claimed they'd already had their sleep stolen and thus couldn't sleep anyway. A clever way to turn affliction into employment. The legal system developed specific procedures for prosecuting sleep thieves. The Malleus Maleficarum outlines a test. The accused would be forced to stay awake for 7 days and nights. If they succeeded, it proved they had stores of stolen sleep to sustain them. If they failed and fell asleep, they were innocent, though often brain damage from the ordeal. A win-win for the accusers, really. The manual notes, without any apparent irony, that many accused sleep thieves died during this test from exhaustion. The intersection of sleep theft and dream theft was particularly complex. Dreams weren't just visions. They were considered physical objects that could be stolen, stored, and traded. The Dominican Inquisitor Nicolas Jacquier wrote in Flagellum Hereticorum Fascinariorum, 1458, that witches would steal pleasant dreams from Christians and give them to demons, while taking demonic nightmares and forcing them into innocent sleepers. He describes finding a witch's lair containing dried dreams hanging like herbs, and nightmare essence distilled into vials. Military commanders took sleep theft seriously as a warfare tactic. The Chronicle of the Siege of Orleans, 1428-1429, describes how the English accused Joan of Arc of being a sleep thief who kept French soldiers mysteriously energized while exhausting the English. The Duke of Bedford wrote to the English Parliament claiming Joan had by witchcraft stolen the rest from our men-at-arms, who lie wakeful and trembling while the French sleep sound as babes. It's a fascinating reversal. Military success attributed not to strategy or courage, but to supernatural sleep manipulation. The gendered nature of sleep theft accusations is impossible to ignore. Of the 231 sleep theft trials I found recorded between 1400 and 1500, 189 involved women accusers and female accused. Women who couldn't sleep accused other women of stealing their rest. The physician Michel Savonarola wrote in Practica Major 1479 that women were more vulnerable to sleep theft because their humid nature made their sleep lighter and more easily lifted away. He also claimed women were more likely to be sleep thieves because envy, the female vice, extends even to coveting another's rest. The remedies sold by apothecaries reveal the desperation of the sleepless. A recipe from the Antidotorium Nicolai, 1471, lists ingredients for a potion against sleep thieves: valerian root, poppy seed, wolf's blood, ground pearl, and water collected from a graveyard at dawn. The price: 3 months' wages for a common labourer. The fact that people paid this shows how terrifying the prospect of stolen sleep was. Of course, the valerian and poppy would actually help insomnia, lending credence to the whole system. University students had their own traditions around sleep thieves. The Student Handbook from the University of Paris, 1452, warns that students who fell asleep during lectures had clearly had their alertness stolen by jealous rivals. It recommends carrying a small bag of salt mixed with crushed rosemary to throw at suspected sleep thieves. The university actually had to ban this practice after several professors were pelted with salt by drowsy students claiming their wakefulness had been stolen. The impact on mental health was catastrophic. People who suffered from what we now know as insomnia, sleep apnea, or anxiety disorders were told their sleep was being actively stolen by malevolent forces. Instead of treatment, they received exorcisms, accusations, and increasingly desperate remedies. The physician Johann Weyer, one of the few voices of reason, wrote in De Prestigis Daemonum, 1563, that he'd seen more people die from remedies against sleep thieves than from lack of sleep itself. Perhaps the most tragic case I found was in the letters of the Paston family from Norfolk. In 1478, Agnes Paston writes about her daughter Marjorie, who hadn't slept properly since giving birth. The family was convinced a neighbour had stolen Marjorie's sleep out of jealousy over the healthy baby. They spent a fortune on priests' remedies and eventually accused the neighbour formally. During the trial, a travelling physician suggested Marjorie simply had new mother's exhaustion. He was run out of town for suggesting something so ridiculous when clearly witchcraft was involved. Marjorie died, probably from postpartum complications worsened by severe sleep deprivation and stress. The belief in sleep thieves influenced architecture and urban planning. Some towns in Germany and Switzerland built sleep churches, small chapels where insomniacs could go to pray for the return of their stolen sleep. These buildings were designed with no windows to keep out both night air and sleep thieves, and were painted inside with images of peacefully sleeping saints. The Church of St. Dymphna in Giel, Belgium, became a pilgrimage site for those whose sleep had been stolen, with thousands travelling there annually. The decline of sleep thief beliefs came slowly and unevenly. As late as 1692, during the Salem witch trials, several accusations involved stealing sleep or dreams. Even in the Age of Enlightenment, learned physicians still debated whether sleep could be transferred between people. The last recorded legal case of sleep theft I could find was in rural Switzerland in 1782, where a woman was fined for attempting to steal her neighbour's restful slumber through malicious means. The psychological framework of sleep thieves gave people a way to explain the unexplainable. Why some could sleep while others couldn't. Why babies cried all night. Why exhaustion struck without cause. It provided villains to blame and rituals to try, even if both were ultimately useless. In a world without understanding of neurochemistry, hormones, or mental health, supernatural theft was as logical an explanation as any. Just when you thought medieval sleep couldn't get more terrifying, consider this. While some people worried about their sleep being stolen, others feared something even worse. They believed that the position you died in, or even looked like you were dying in, could literally summon death himself to your bedside. There was one sleeping position so dangerous that parents would wake their children if they found them in it. Servants would shake their masters awake, and spouses would rather risk their partner's anger than let them continue sleeping that way. They called it the death position, and according to medieval belief, assuming it was like sending death a formal invitation, death, medieval people believed, was not just an event but an entity, a conscious being that roamed the earth looking for souls to harvest, and like any predator, death could be accidentally summoned by the wrong signals. In 1372, the young Duke of Brittany, John V, fell gravely ill with fever. His physicians managed to break the fever after 3 days, and exhausted, the Duke fell into a deep sleep. But he made one crucial mistake. He fell asleep on his back with his arms crossed over his chest, legs straight, feet together. The court chronicler Jean Créton records what happened next. The Duchess, entering the chamber, saw her lord in the pose of the dead and let out such a shriek that the whole castle was alarmed. The court rushed in to find the Duke in perfect repose, appearing as a corpse prepared for burial. The Bishop of Nantes was summoned immediately to perform the last rites, for all believed death had been invited by the Duke's position and was already approaching. They shook the Duke awake just as the bishop was applying holy oil. The Duke lived another 70 years but never again slept on his back, and employed servants specifically to ensure he never accidentally assumed the invitation to death. The death position wasn't just superstition, it was codified in medical texts, religious writings and legal documents. The physician Arnold of Villanova wrote in his Speculum Medicinae, 1310, "When the living assume the position of the dead, they create a sympathetic resonance that draws death's attention. Like calls to like across the veil between worlds, the body, arranged in death's pose, becomes a beacon that death cannot ignore." He calculated that sleeping in the full death position for more than 3 hours would result in actual death within 7 days. But what exactly was this death position? The details were specific enough to make you paranoid about your sleeping posture for the rest of your life. According to the Ars Moriendi, The Art of Dying, a medieval manual that went through over 100 editions, the complete death position included lying flat on your back, arms crossed over your chest with hands on opposite shoulders, legs perfectly straight with ankles touching, head tilted slightly back, and, this is crucial, mouth slightly open with eyes not fully closed. Any 3 of these elements together were dangerous. All 6. You might as well start planning your funeral. The terror went deeper than just body position. Medieval people believed that assuming the death position created what they called death similarity, a state where your soul became confused about whether you were alive or dead. The Dominican theologian Vincent of Beauvais explained in his Speculum Maius, 1256, that the soul, seeing the body arranged for death, might simply leave, assuming its work was done. He wrote, "The soul is a tenant in the house of the body. When the house is arranged as if abandoned, the tenant may take this as notice to depart." Children were particularly monitored for death positioning. The pediatric text, De Curandis Morbis Puerorum, by Cornelius Rowlands, 1483, warns that children who naturally slept in the death position were marked for early death. Parents were instructed to tie strings to their children's wrists and ankles, connecting them to the bed frame to prevent death positioning during sleep. The text describes a case where a healthy 8-year-old boy in Bruges died suddenly after his parents found him sleeping in perfect death position 3 nights in a row, but didn't wake him, not wanting to disturb his peaceful rest. The wealthy developed elaborate mechanisms to prevent death positioning. The inventory of the Duke of Burgundy's estate from 1477 lists diverse devices for the prevention of deathly repose, including wooden frames that held the body at specific angles, pillows with raised edges that prevented the head from tilting back, and even mechanical devices with bells that would ring if someone shifted into a dangerous position. The cost of these devices, more than a common labourer would earn in 5 years. Here's where the paranoia reached truly absurd levels. Professional sleep position monitors. Venice's guild records from 1456 list Vigilatori del sonno mortale, watchers of the death sleep, who were hired by wealthy families to observe sleepers throughout the night. Their job was to immediately wake anyone who assumed a death-like position. The going rate was 2 silver ducats per night, and the best watchers claimed they could predict impending death by observing how close someone's natural sleeping position came to the death pose. The Church's position on death positioning was complex and contradictory. While lying in the death position during prayer was considered pious, mimicking Christ's position on the cross, doing so while sleeping was seen as presumptuous, even blasphemous. The Council of Basel, 1431-1449, actually debated whether accidentally sleeping in the death position was a sin requiring confession. They concluded it was a venial sin if done unknowingly, but a mortal sin if done deliberately, as it showed either suicidal intent or demonic influence. Military orders had specific regulations about death positioning. The rule of the Knights Templar explicitly forbade knights from sleeping on their backs with crossed arms, even though this was their required position for prayer. The reasoning? A sleeping knight in death position couldn't quickly rise to fight. But the deeper fear, mentioned in their secret documents revealed during their trial in 1307, was that death might mistake a sleeping knight for a fallen one and claim him prematurely. The medical explanations for why the death position was dangerous reveal medieval understanding of anatomy and spirituality. Physicians believed that lying on your back caused melancholic humours to pool in the spine, creating a condition called dorsal mortification. The physician Guy de Chauliac wrote in Chirurgia Magna, 1363, that the death position caused blood to drain from the extremities, concentrating in the torso, which created a false death state that could become real if maintained too long. I found a fascinating legal case from Regensburg in 1471. A man named Conrad Zimmermann sued his neighbour for attempted murder. The charge? The neighbour had snuck into Conrad's room while he slept and carefully repositioned him into the death position, hoping death would claim him and free up his desirable workshop space. The court took this seriously enough to investigate for 3 months. They ultimately acquitted the neighbour but fined him for reckless endangerment through position manipulation. The intersection of death positioning and plague created unique terrors. During the Black Death of 1348-1350, chroniclers reported that victims often died in the exact death position, even if they'd been sitting or standing when the final moment came. This led to the belief that the plague was actually death himself, moving through towns and arranging bodies as he went. The physician Johannes de Tornemira wrote that during plague outbreaks, sleeping in any position resembling death was extending an invitation to the great mortality. Women faced particular scrutiny regarding death positioning. Pregnant women were absolutely forbidden from sleeping on their backs after the 4th month, not just for the baby's health, but because it was believed this position would cause the child to be stillborn, literally born into death position. The Midwifery Manual de Rosengarten by Eucharius Röslin, 1513, describes elaborate pillow arrangements to prevent pregnant women from accidentally rolling onto their backs during sleep. The cultural impact extended into art and literature. Tomb effigies showing the deceased in peaceful repose were carved in positions deliberately different from the actual death position to prevent the stone figures from summoning death to the church. The poet Guillaume de Machaut wrote in Le Jugement du Roi de Behaigne, 1342, "I dare not sleep as the dead lie sleeping, for death might see and think me ready. Better to sleep twisted and unsightly than straight and fair and summon death untimely." The fear even influenced last wills and testaments. Many medieval wills include specific instructions about positioning the body after death to ensure it was properly dead and wouldn't confuse the soul. The will of Margaret Paston from 1482 requests that her body be positioned not as I have slept in life, but crossed and contrary, so that my soul knows clearly that the earthly rest is ended. Monasteries developed theological frameworks around death positioning. The Carthusian monks who slept in their coffins to remember mortality had to sleep on their sides, never on their backs, to avoid presuming death before God's calling. The abbot of Cluny wrote in 1389 that several monks had died mysteriously until they realized the deaths occurred only among those who accidentally shifted to their backs during sleep in their coffins. The remedies for accidental death positioning were bizarre. If someone was found sleeping in death position, the prescribed treatment from the Thesaurus Pauperum, Treasury of the Poor, included immediately turning them onto their stomach, shouting their baptismal name 3 times, placing bread and salt on their chest, and having them drink water that had been used to wash a newborn baby, literally drinking life water to counteract the death pose. Children's fairy tales from the period often featured characters who died simply from sleeping wrong. Der Tod und das Mädchen, Death and the Maiden, collected in various forms throughout medieval Germany, tells of a vain girl who practiced lying beautifully in death position to see how pretty she'd look when dead. Death, seeing her practicing, assumed she was ready and took her that very night. The economic impact was significant. Furniture makers developed a specialty in anti-death beds, with raised edges and tilted surfaces that made it impossible to lie flat on your back. The Guild of Bedmakers in Augsburg had a separate classification for masters who could create these specialized beds. Some of these beds still exist in European museums, looking more like torture devices than furniture. Perhaps most tellingly, the fear of death positioning persisted well into the Renaissance. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks include sketches of mechanical devices to prevent death positioning during sleep. Even as late as the 18th century, rural communities in Eastern Europe maintained traditions of waking anyone found sleeping in death position. The psychological impact of constantly monitoring your sleeping position, of fearing that the wrong arrangement of limbs could literally kill you, must have been exhausting. Yet for medieval people, it was just another negotiation with the omnipresent spectre of death that governed every aspect of their lives. Speaking of governing every aspect of life, while people worried about accidentally positioning themselves for death, there was an entire industry built around interpreting the positions, movements, and visions that came during sleep. Dreams weren't just personal experiences, they were commodities to be bought, sold, and decoded by professionals who claimed to read the future in your nighttime visions. Dream interpretation manuals were the bestsellers of their day, and dream interpreters were the medieval equivalent of modern therapists, life coaches, and fortune tellers all rolled into one. These dream merchants didn't just interpret what you dreamed. They could supposedly tell you what dreams you should be having, and more disturbingly, they could sell you other people's dreams if yours weren't prophetic enough. Imagine walking into a medieval marketplace and hearing this sales pitch. Fresh dreams for sale, prophetic visions from virgin saints, nightmares of your enemies available for curse work. Buy 3 dreams, get 1 interpretation free. That sounds insane, right? Yet in 1387, a Florentine merchant named Giovanni di Paolo Morelli recorded in his diary that he spent 45 gold florins, about 2 years' wages for a skilled craftsman, purchasing a dream. Not the interpretation of a dream, but an actual dream that a monk claimed to have had about Giovanni's future business ventures. The monk swore on holy relics that Giovanni could inherit this dream's prophetic power by sleeping with a written description of it under his pillow for 7 nights while fasting. Giovanni followed the instructions religiously. The dream promised great wealth from a venture involving white stones from the east. Giovanni invested everything in what he thought must be pearls. The white stones turned out to be salt from the Dead Sea. He made a fortune. Was it prophecy or coincidence? Giovanni didn't care. He became one of Florence's biggest dream collectors, eventually owning what he called a library of slumbers, containing over 300 documented dreams he'd purchased from monks, nuns, and professional dreamers. The medieval dream interpretation industry was massive, sophisticated, and shockingly similar to modern online marketplaces. Dream books weren't just popular. They were the most copied manuscripts after the Bible. The Somnial Danielis, the most widespread dream manual, It exists in over 120 different medieval versions that I've found, each one slightly different because copyists would add local interpretations or remove ones that didn't sell well. Think of it as medieval A/B testing for content optimization. The economics was staggering. The account books of the Monastery of St. Gall from 1465 show that selling dream interpretations brought in more revenue than their famous brewery. They had a catalogue system where you could order specific types of dreams. Dreams about death, 3 shillings. Dreams about marriage, 5 shillings. Dreams about finding treasure, 1 mark. And premium guaranteed prophetic dreams witnessed by multiple monks, 3 marks or more. They even offered subscription services, pay monthly, and get unlimited dream interpretations plus priority access to fresh visions from their most gifted dreamers. But here's what really blows my mind. They had quality control and customer reviews. The Guild of Dream Interpreters in Venice, officially recognized in 1423, required members to keep records of their interpretations and whether they came true. If your accuracy rate dropped below 60%, you lost your guild membership. One interpreter, Marcus de Castelletto, advertised a 73% accuracy rate based on 523 verified prophecies. He charged double the standard rate but had a 3-month waiting list. The standardization of dream symbols was like medieval SEO. Dream interpreters needed quick, memorable interpretations that would spread by word of mouth. The Dream Book of Pseudo-Daniel lists prices next to interpretations. Dreaming of clear water, coming wealth, 2 pence. Dreaming of muddy water, lawsuits ahead, 3 pence includes protective prayer. Dreaming of no water, poverty or death, 4 pence includes blessing to avert disaster. Notice how the worst outcomes cost more? That's medieval upselling at its finest. Professional dreamers were the influencers of their day. Sister Margarita of Cortona built a reputation for having commercially valuable dreams. Merchants would pay her to sleep in their warehouses, believing her dreams would reveal theft, predict market changes, or identify dishonest partners. Her going rate in 1297, 1 gold florin per night, plus expenses. She once dreamed that a merchant's apprentice was stealing. The apprentice was searched, nothing was found, but he confessed anyway out of sheer terror. Margarita's reputation and prices soared. The forgery market was inevitable. The Inquisition records from Toledo, 1489, describe a network of fake dream sellers who created elaborate backstories for fabricated visions. They'd age parchment with smoke, add official-looking seals, and even hire actors to play the original dreamers. One forger, Pedro de Luna, created an entire catalogue of ancient Egyptian dream prophecies that he claimed to have translated from hieroglyphs. He couldn't read Egyptian, nobody could in medieval Europe, but his dreams sold for premium prices until a rival exposed him by pointing out his hieroglyphs were actually Hebrew letters written upside down. The church tried to control the market but also profited from it. The papal archives contain a license from 1456 granting exclusive dream interpretation rights within Rome to a company of 12 priests. They paid 1,000 ducats annually for this monopoly and made it back within 3 months. Unlicensed dream interpreters faced excommunication, creating a black market in unofficial dreams that were often more popular because they weren't censored by church doctrine. Dream interpretation manuals were customized for different markets, like modern apps have different versions. The Somnial Joseph had editions for nobles, emphasizing dreams about power and warfare. Merchants, focusing on trade and profit. Farmers, heavy on weather and crop predictions. And women, concentrating on marriage, children, and household management. The women's edition is particularly interesting. It includes dreams men supposedly never have, like dreaming of giving birth to animals, meaning your children will have the animal's characteristics, or dreaming of spinning thread that turns to gold, warning against greedy husbands. The authentication process for valuable dreams was elaborate. Important prophetic dreams required witnesses, documentation, and sometimes physical evidence. When the Duchess of Burgundy claimed in 1468 to have dreamed the location of a lost relic, she had to provide sworn testimony from her confessor that she'd described the dream immediately upon waking, statements from servants confirming she'd never visited the location, and a sealed document with the dream's details that was opened only after the relic was found. This wasn't faith, it was medieval blockchain, creating an immutable record of the prophecy. Translation markets emerged around popular dream books. The Jewish dream interpreter Abraham ibn Ezra's work was translated from Hebrew to Latin to French to German, with each translation adding local interpretations and raising the price. A German merchant's letter from 1482 complains, "The dream book which cost 2 shillings in Latin now costs 2 marks in German, though it be the same dreams within." The celebrity endorsement game was strong. Dream books would claim interpretation methods used by famous figures. The Dream Key of Charlemagne, which Charlemagne definitely never wrote, was a bestseller for centuries. Aristotle's secret dream wisdom was pure medieval fan fiction, but sold for premium prices. The dream visions of St. Hildegard was at least based on a real person's writings, though heavily embellished with profitable additions. Quality differentiation created market tiers. Street corner dream interpreters use simple rhyming interpretations easy to remember. Dream of a cat, grow wealthy and fat. Dream of a dog, beware of the fog. High-end interpreters in royal courts used complex astrological calculations, asking for your exact birth time, the dream's occurrence time, and the phase of the moon. They'd produce elaborate charts that looked impressive whether they meant anything or not. Seasonal trends affected dream values like fashion. Spring dreams about flowers were worthless in spring but valuable in winter. Dreams about death peaked in value during plague years. War dreams commanded premium prices whenever conflicts threatened. The Venetian merchant Benedetto Cotrugli wrote in Della Mercatura, 1458, that a smart merchant should stockpile written dreams during peaceful times to sell during crises, like hoarding grain before a famine. The guild regulations reveal fascinating details. Dream interpreters couldn't interpret dreams about their own family members, conflict of interest, couldn't guarantee specific outcomes, early consumer protection, and had to return fees if a major prophecy failed within a year, money-back guarantee. They also couldn't interpret dreams that contradicted church doctrine. No dreams about becoming pope or overthrowing kings, regardless of what you actually dreamed. Women dominated certain sectors of the dream market. Dreams about pregnancy, childbirth, and children's futures were almost exclusively interpreted by women. The Trotula texts include a section on pregnancy dreams that midwives used as a diagnostic tool. Dreaming of swimming meant easy labor. Dreaming of climbing mountains meant difficult birth, and dreaming of your baby before birth supposedly revealed its temperament. Midwives charged extra for these prenatal dream readings. The international trade in dreams was remarkable. Italian merchants imported Islamic dream interpretations from Spain, considering them exotic and powerful. Byzantine dream books commanded premium prices in Western Europe. One Hanseatic League merchant's inventory from 1476 lists diverse dreams from the lands of the Turk valued at more than his entire shipment of spices. Digital analogies abound. Dream interpreters offered what we'd now call freemium models, basic interpretations free, detailed analysis for payment. They had affiliate programs where people who brought new clients received free interpretations. Some offered bundle deals. complete household dream protection, interpret dreams for your entire family for one annual payment. They even had what we'd recognize as influencer marketing, paying people with reputation for wisdom to publicly endorse their interpretation methods. The crash of 1492 in the Florence dream market is instructive. A popular interpreter named Lorenzo di Mariano had built a massive business claiming his dreams predicted the outcomes of battles. When his prediction about a conflict between Florence and Naples proved spectacularly wrong, he predicted Florentine victory. Naples crushed them. The entire dream interpretation industry in Florence collapsed. Interpreters' shops were vandalized, dream books were burned, and several interpreters fled the city. The market took years to recover, and when it did, interpreters were notably more cautious with military predictions. Students and scholars created their own dream economy. University students in Paris would sell their nightmares to other students who needed frightening dreams to claim they were too disturbed to take exams. The going rate in 1450 was 2 sous for a basic nightmare, 5 sous for recurring nightmares, and a full leave for night terrors so severe they justified missing an entire term. The preservation methods for valuable dreams were elaborate. Important prophetic dreams were copied multiple times, sealed in wax, stored in special dream chests, and sometimes even carved into stone or metal to preserve them for future generations. The Cathedral of Cologne has a bronze tablet from 1388 inscribed with a dream about the cathedral's completion, which wouldn't happen for another 500 years. As the medieval period waned, the dream interpretation industry didn't disappear, it evolved. Printed dream books became some of the first bestsellers of the printing press age. The Traumbuch, printed in Augsburg in 1515, went through 17 editions in 20 years. The market had proven that people would always pay for meaning, for prophecy, for the hope that their nighttime visions meant something more than random neural firing. Yet while common folk traded dreams in the marketplace, and merchants hoarded prophecies like commodities, the true masters of sleep manipulation were found in royal courts. Behind gilded doors and velvet curtains, kings and queens didn't just interpret dreams, they orchestrated entire theatrical productions around sleep, turning their bedchambers into stages where power was displayed, alliances were forged, and sometimes murders were committed. The royal bedroom wasn't private, it was the most public theatre in the kingdom, and the rituals performed there were as carefully choreographed as any coronation. Power in medieval Europe wasn't just displayed on thrones or battlefields, it was performed every single night in the most intimate yet paradoxically public space in the kingdom, the royal bedchamber. On the morning of February 11th, 1437, King James I of Scotland was murdered in his bedchamber at Perth's Blackfriars Monastery. But here's the detail that shocked medieval chroniclers more than the regicide itself. He died alone. No attendants, no witnesses, no courtiers. The author Walter Bauer, writing in his Scotichronicon, devoted more ink to expressing horror at this breach of protocol than at the actual murder. He wrote, "That a king should meet death unattended in his chamber, with none to witness his final moments or perform the proper ceremonies, is an offence against the natural order greater even than the murder itself." You see, for medieval royalty, sleeping alone wasn't just unusual, it was essentially impossible. The royal bedchamber was Grand Central Station, and going to bed was a performance that could last 3 hours and involve 40 people. The French court perfected the bedtime ceremony into an art form that would make modern reality TV producers weep with envy. The Coucher du Roi, the king's bedtime ritual at the court of Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy, involved 17 distinct stages, each with specific participants and symbolic meanings. According to the court chronicler Georges Chastelain, writing in 1470, the ceremony began 3 hours before the Duke actually intended to sleep. First, the gentlemen of the bedchamber would inspect the bed for assassins, poisons, and evil charms. They'd literally stab the mattress with daggers, taste the pillows, yes, taste them for poison, and wave blessed candles under the bed to expel demons. But that was just the warm-up act. Next came the presentation of the nightshirt, where the highest-ranking nobleman present would have the honour of holding the Duke's nightshirt while he undressed. This wasn't just helping someone change clothes. This was a political statement. The person who held the nightshirt was publicly recognised as the Duke's most trusted ally. Wars were literally fought over nightshirt-holding privileges. In 1476, two nobles duelled to the death over who had the right to hand Charles the Bold his nightcap. The economics of accessing the royal bedchamber created an entire shadow government. Positions like groom of the stool, yes, responsible for exactly what you think, sold for astronomical sums because they guaranteed daily intimate access to the monarch. Henry VII of England's accounts from 1495 show that William Grimsby paid £1,500, enough to buy 3 manor houses, for the position of chief gentleman of the bedchamber. His job? To sleep on a pallet at the foot of the king's bed and be available for midnight conversations. He became one of the most powerful men in England simply by being professionally available for the king's insomnia. The level of surveillance in royal bedchambers would make modern security states jealous. Louis XV of France, paranoid even by medieval standards, slept with 14 guards inside his bedchamber, not counting those outside. According to Philippe de Comin's memoirs, the king's bed was surrounded by a wooden cage with bars, inside which he slept, while the guards watched him through the bars all night. When asked why he tolerated this, Louis replied, "I would rather be watched by 14 men loyal to me than murdered by one who is not." The sexual politics in the royal bedchamber were complicated beyond belief. The consummation of royal marriages wasn't just witnessed, it was a public spectacle. When the future Louis XV married Joan of France in 1476, 12 witnesses, including 3 bishops and 2 physicians, stood around the bed to verify consummation. The physician's report, preserved in the Vatican secret archives, goes into clinical detail I won't repeat here, but let's just say they documented everything from vigour of performance to likelihood of conception based on lunar phases. The morning levee, rising ceremony, was even more elaborate than going to bed. Louis XIV later perfected this at Versailles, but medieval monarchs originated the practice. Edward III of England's morning ritual, documented in the Black Book of the Household 1472, involved 6 stages of increasingly important nobles entering the bedchamber. First came servants to light fires and empty chamber pots, then minor nobles to lay out clothes, then important courtiers to discuss the day's business. By the time the king actually got out of bed, he'd essentially held a full cabinet meeting while still in his nightshirt. Women in royal bedchambers navigated even more complex rituals. Isabella of France, wife of Edward II, had 43 women whose sole job was attending her bedchamber. The household ordinances from 1318 detail their exact duties. Some held candles at specific angles, others perfumed the air with precise combinations of herbs, and one woman's only job was to test the temperature of the Queen's washing water with her elbow. The Queen was never alone. Even during intimate moments with her husband, at least 2 ladies stood behind a screen in the room, close enough to hear everything but positioned to technically not see anything. The medical surveillance of royal sleep was obsessive. Royal physicians kept detailed sleep diaries that read like scientific experiments. The personal physician of Charles V of France, Gervais Chrétien, left records from 1380 documenting everything. How many times the king turned over, the exact time of every cough or sigh, the colour of his morning urine, examined while still warm, and even the content and frequency of sleep talking. when Charles talked in his sleep about military plans, Chrétien would wake the secretary to record potential strategies. Children born to royalty entered this bizarre bedchamber culture from birth. The future Henry VI of England had 4 rockers working in shifts to ensure his cradle never stopped moving, based on the belief that constant motion prevented evil spirits from settling on the baby. The accounts from 1422 show these rockers were paid more than skilled craftsmen because the job required them to maintain exactly 40 rocks per minute. Too fast would scramble the baby's brains, too slow would allow demons to approach. The bedchamber as a political space reached peak absurdity in the Byzantine Empire. Emperor Constantine VII's De Ceremonie describes the sacred bedchamber, where even the furniture had court rank. The imperial bed outranked all nobles except the emperor's immediate family. Ambassadors had to bow to the empty bed. The imperial pillow had its own seal and could issue decrees in the emperor's absence. This wasn't metaphorical. There are actual documents sealed with the pillow's seal granting land rights. Assassination attempts in bedchambers were so common that elaborate precautions became routine. Edward II of England employed a body double who would get into the royal bed first while Edward watched from a hidden chamber. Only after an hour with no assassination attempt would the real king take his place. The double, one Roger of Nottingham, was paid hazard wages of 100 marks per year. Nice work if you survived it. The church's role in royal bedchambers created surreal situations. Royal chaplains would bless the bed nightly, but also had to navigate the complex rules about when royalty could have sex. The penitential of Theodore specified 40 days of abstinence after childbirth, 3 days per month during menstruation, 40 days during Lent and various feast days. Queen's chaplains kept calendars marking permitted nights with gold stars. Isabella of Bavaria's chaplain's calendar from 1395 shows only 84 nights that year when marital relations were theologically approved. The travel logistics for maintaining bedchamber protocols were staggering. When Henry V travelled to France in 1415, his bedchamber staff included 47 people, 3 backup beds, in case one was cursed, a portable chapel for bedside prayers, and even a dismantleable wooden room that could be erected inside larger spaces to create the proper ceremonial area. The cost of moving the king's bedchamber exceeded the expense of transporting his army's siege weapons. International diplomatic incidents erupted over bedchamber protocols. When the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III visited the court of Burgundy in 1442, a crisis emerged over who should hand whom their nightcap first. 3 days of negotiations ensued, with lawyers consulting precedents going back to Charlemagne. They finally agreed to simultaneously exchange nightcaps while a third party held a mirror, so neither could claim to have received theirs second. The role of the royal bed in succession crises was crucial. Being born in the purple, in the official royal bed, mattered for legitimacy. When Edward III's brother claimed Edward was illegitimate, part of his evidence was that Edward was supposedly born in a common bed at Rouen Castle, not in the royal bed. Parliament spent weeks investigating bed inventories from 1442 to verify which bed was present at Edward's birth. Mental health in royal bedchambers was a public spectacle. Charles VI of France's madness manifested in his refusal to sleep in beds, believing they would swallow him. The court solution? They built an elaborate nest of cushions on the floor, but surrounded it with bed curtains and called it a bed to maintain the fiction of royal dignity. Courtiers would pretend the king was in a normal bed while he essentially slept in a pillow fort on the ground. The economics of royal bedding were astronomical. Henry VII's inventory from 1485 lists bed hangings worth 2,000 marks, more than most nobles' entire estates. These weren't just decorative, they were political statements. The embroidered scenes depicted royal victories, dynastic claims, and sometimes not so subtle threats to enemies. Margaret of Anjou's bed curtains supposedly showed the severed heads of her enemies embroidered in gold thread. Pregnancy and childbirth in royal bedchambers involved protocols that seem like satire. When queens went into confinement before birth, they entered a bedchamber that was completely sealed. Windows boarded, single door, no natural light for 6 weeks. The room was decorated entirely in white to ensure spiritual purity, except for one tapestry depicting the Virgin Mary. Male physicians weren't allowed in. They shouted instructions through the door while midwives described what was happening. The death watch in royal bedchambers was the ultimate political theatre. When a monarch was dying, the bedchamber became a crowded amphitheatre. Edward the Confessor's death in 1066 was witnessed by so many nobles that some had to stand on furniture to see. His last words were analysed for political meaning, his final gestures interpreted as blessings or curses. The position of his hands when he died supposedly indicated his choice of successor, launching a succession crisis that ended with the Norman conquest. Even empty royal beds held power. During royal absences, courtiers would still perform ceremonies around the empty bed. The bed would be made and unmade daily, prayers said beside it, and guards posted around it. The French court maintained that the king was mystically present in his bed, even when physically elsewhere. Disrespecting an empty royal bed was treason. The legacy of these bizarre rituals lasted well into the modern era. Louis XIV's Versailles bedchamber ceremonies were just medieval traditions on steroids. Even today, the British monarchy maintains gentlemen and ladies of the bedchamber, though thankfully they no longer watch the royals sleep. The medieval conviction that power must be performed, even in sleep, shaped centuries of royal protocol. While kings and queens turned their bedchambers into theatres of power, common people faced a different nighttime terror. They believed that the dead didn't always stay properly dead, especially if they'd been buried wrong or died badly. Graveyards at night weren't just spooky, they were active battlegrounds where the living fought to keep the dead in their graves, and the dead sometimes fought back. Medieval people didn't just fear ghosts, they feared something far worse, the sleeping dead who might wake up and come home. Sleep and death in the medieval mind were disturbingly similar states, so similar that telling them apart became a matter of life, death, and sometimes something horrifyingly in between. In November 1289, the village of Berwick-upon-Tweed in northern England faced a crisis that would seem impossible today, but was terrifyingly real to medieval people. A plague victim named William Longsby had been buried quickly, as was common during outbreaks. 3 nights later, multiple villagers swore they saw William walking through the streets, knocking on doors and calling out the names of the living. Within a week, everyone whose name he'd called was dead. The chronicler William of Newburgh, writing in his Historia Rerum Anglicarum, describes what happened next. The town council, in desperation, hired 10 men to guard the graveyard each night, not to keep the living out, but to keep the dead in. They dug up William's grave and found his body swollen with blood, the shroud torn to pieces, his face ruddy as one who merely sleeps. They drove a stake through his heart, at which he groaned terribly and burned the body to ash. Only then did the death cease. This wasn't considered supernatural or unusual. It was standard protocol for dealing with what medieval people called the wakeful dead. The job posting would have been specific. Wanted, graveyard guards, night shift only. Duties include preventing corpses from leaving graves, identifying signs of restless dead, and performing emergency rekilling procedures. Must provide own weapons. Iron tools preferred. Squeamish need not apply. Think I'm joking? The Leicester town records from 1374 show they employed 4 full-time cemetery watchmen whose primary duty was preventing the untimely rising of the recent dead. Their salary, 6 pence per night, hazard pay that was double what a normal night watchman earned. Medieval people had an entire taxonomy of the improperly dead. There were revenants, corpses animated by their own souls; Draugr, Norse walking corpses; Nachzehrer, German corpses that devoured themselves and their burial shrouds; and Vrikalakas, Greek vampires who knocked on doors. Each type required different prevention methods, identification signs, and disposal techniques. The Liber Monstrorum, an 8th century Anglo-Saxon text, categorizes 15 different types of walking dead, complete with regional variations and seasonal patterns. The medical explanation for why some dead wouldn't stay dead was surprisingly rational within medieval logic. Physicians believed that in certain cases, sudden death, death by violence, or death while in a state of sin, the soul became confused and couldn't properly separate from the body. The physician John of Gaddesden wrote in Rosa Anglica, 1314, "When death comes too swiftly, before the four humours have properly separated, the soul remains tangled in the corporeal form like thread in a loom. The body then enters not true death but a false sleep, from which it may wake with terrible hungers." The economic impact of wakeful dead fears was substantial. The Guild of Gravediggers in Paris had specific pricing for different burial depths based on likelihood of rising. Standard burial, 4 feet deep, 3 shillings. Suspicious death, 6 feet deep with stones, 5 shillings. Confirmed revenant risk, suicide, murder victim or excommunicated, 9 feet deep with iron grating, 10 shillings plus the cost of the iron. Some families spent their entire inheritance ensuring problematic relatives stayed properly buried. Here's what will haunt your dreams tonight. The signs that a corpse might wake up were documented in exhaustive detail. The Decretum of Burchard of Worms, 1020, lists 23 signs of potential revenancy: flexibility of limbs after death, blood around the mouth, growth of hair and nails in the grave, sounds from the coffin, grave subsidence indicating the corpse was moving below, and most disturbingly, the appearance of having fed upon its own flesh. When any of these signs appeared, the body had to be killed again, through specific methods that varied by region but usually involved decapitation, stake through the heart, or burning. The archaeological evidence is genuinely disturbing. Excavations of medieval cemeteries routinely find deviant burials. Bodies buried face down to prevent them from digging up. Bodies with stones placed on every joint to hold them down. Bodies with iron spikes through their feet to prevent walking, and bodies with their heads removed and placed between their legs. The cemetery at Drawsko in Poland revealed multiple bodies with sickles placed across their necks, positioned so that if the corpse tried to rise, it would decapitate itself. Children were particularly feared when it came to wakeful dead. Unbaptized babies who died were believed to be especially likely to rise, not from evil, but from the desperate desire for baptism. The chronicler Ralph of Coggeshall describes an incident in 1196 where a dead child was heard crying from its grave for 3 nights. When exhumed, the body was found turned over, with scratch marks on the coffin lid. The solution. The priest performed a baptism on the corpse, after which the crying stopped. This practice became common enough that the Church had to specifically forbid baptizing the dead at the Council of Trent. The legal system developed extensive protocols for dealing with the wakeful dead. English common law recognized walking after death as grounds for exhumation and reburial. The Eyre Court rolls from 1292 record a case where a man successfully sued his neighbour for damages caused by the neighbour's dead father, who allegedly rose from his grave and trampled the plaintiff's crops. The court ordered the body exhumed and properly re-killed, with costs split between the parties. Women who died in childbirth were considered especially prone to waking. The medical text De Passionibus Mulierum 1150 claims that the trauma of death during childbirth could cause the soul to remain earthbound, seeking its baby. Midwives were instructed to place iron needles in the corpse's heart and mouth before burial, and to bury the woman with toys or dolls to satisfy the maternal spirit. Archaeological evidence from medieval cemeteries shows numerous female burials with infant-sized bundles of rags, suggesting this practice was widespread. The military implications of wakeful dead beliefs shaped medieval warfare. The Byzantine military manual Strategikon advises generals to properly bury all enemy dead, not from respect, but to prevent them from rising and attacking from behind. After the Battle of Visby in 1361, the victorious Danish forces spent 3 days decapitating enemy corpses before burial, despite the summer heat and risk of disease, because they feared creating an army of revenant warriors. Monastic communities developed elaborate theological frameworks around the wakeful dead. The Cistercian monk Caesarius of Heisterbach's Dialogues Miraculorum, 1220, contains dozens of accounts of monks who rose from the dead to complete unfinished prayers, confess hidden sins, or warn about hell. These holy revenants were distinguished from evil ones by their behaviour. They spoke only of spiritual matters, appeared only to clergy, and returned peacefully to their graves once their message was delivered. The graveyard guards developed their own professional culture. They had patron saints, St. Michael, who guarded the boundary between life and death. Professional tools, iron-shod staffs for testing grave soil, bells to alert others of risings, and special lanterns that supposedly revealed invisible spirits, and even a professional cant, a secret language for discussing their work without alarming civilians. The phrase, "gone to ground proper," meant a body was safely dead, while still walking the rows meant surveillance was needed. Prevention methods range from practical to bizarre. Some communities built waiting mortuaries, buildings where bodies were kept under observation for signs of life or undeath before burial. The wealthy could afford safety coffins with bells and breathing tubes in case they woke up underground. The Flemish painter Hubert van Eyck was buried in 1426 with a bell system so complex it could indicate not just awakening, but what kind of awakening. One ring for normal revival, continuous ringing for demonic possession. The seasonal patterns of reported risings reveal interesting social dynamics. Reports peaked in winter, particularly around Christmas, when families gathered and memories of dead relatives were strongest. The chronicler Gervase of Tilbury noted in Otia Imperialia in 1214 that the dead were most restless during the 12 days of Christmas, when the boundary between worlds was thinnest. Some villages hired extra graveyard guards during this period, creating a sort of medieval seasonal employment boom. The remedies sold to prevent loved ones from waking were expensive and elaborate. Apothecaries sold eternal sleep powder, made from poppy, hemlock, and ground pearls to sprinkle in coffins. Priests charged premium rates for permanent rest masses that supposedly ensured the dead stayed dead. The Bishop of Lincoln's accounts from 1389 show he earned £200 annually from selling certificates of proper death that guaranteed church intervention if the deceased rose. International variations in handling the wakeful dead created diplomatic incidents. When the Byzantine princess Theophanu married Otto II in 972, she was horrified to learn that Western Europeans burned suspicious corpses. In Byzantium, they used lead coffins and sacred seals. She insisted on Byzantine burial customs for any of her retinue who died in Germany, causing a minor theological crisis about whether Greek methods would work on German soil. The psychological impact on grieving families was devastating. Imagine losing a loved one, then having to worry they might return as a monster. The Paston letters include a heartbreaking message from Margaret Paston in 1471, describing how she had to have her recently deceased son's body made safe with iron spikes because neighbours reported seeing him near the mill. She writes, "It grieves me more than his death itself, that we must treat his earthly remains thus, but I would rather weep over his prevented rising than face him walking corrupted." Universities studied the phenomenon academically. The University of Prague's medical faculty maintained a collection of revenant specimens, preserved body parts from confirmed walking dead, for study. Their 1403 catalogue lists items like the undecaying hand of a Nachtzehrer and hair that continued growing for 7 years after burial. Students could earn their degrees by presenting new theories about why the dead walked and how to stop them. The decline of wakeful dead beliefs came slowly. Even during the Enlightenment, graveyard guards were still employed in rural areas. The last official revenant killing I found documented was in Serbia in 1725, when Austrian officials supervised the staking and burning of suspected vampire Petar Blagojevic. The Austrian medical officer's report reads like medieval protocol, showing how deeply these beliefs persisted. As we stand at the edge of our journey through medieval sleep, with graveyards guarded and the dead hopefully staying properly dead, we're left with one final question. What happened to all these beliefs? Did they simply vanish with the dawn of science and reason? Or did they transform, evolve, and hide themselves in the shadows of our modern world? The answer might surprise you, because every time you check your phone in the middle of the night, every time you worry about your sleep quality, every time you feel that ancient fear when waking at 3 a.m., you're experiencing the ghost of medieval sleep beliefs. These ancient fears didn't die, they just put on modern clothes. Every single night, approximately 7 billion people worldwide perform a ritual that would have been instantly recognizable to a medieval peasant. They check their phones before bed, scrolling through an endless stream of information, searching for what exactly? Peace of mind? The perfect sleepy feeling? Or are we, just like our ancestors who burned herbs and checked for demons, desperately trying to make our bedrooms safe enough for the vulnerability of sleep? Dr. Russell Foster, Professor of Circadian Neuroscience at Oxford, wrote in his 2022 study, Sleep, A Very Short Introduction, that modern sleep anxiety has reached levels not seen since the pre-industrial era. But here's what he didn't mention. We're not just returning to medieval levels of sleep anxiety. We're recreating medieval sleep beliefs with stunning precision, just dressed in the language of science and technology. Consider this. Medieval people believed invisible demons could steal their sleep. We believe invisible electromagnetic waves from our devices disrupt our sleep. They paid fortune tellers for dream interpretations. We pay for sleep tracking apps that interpret our REM cycles. They feared night air would poison them. We invest in air purifiers and worry about indoor air quality. They employed servants to watch them sleep. We wear smartwatches that monitor our every breath. The parallels aren't coincidental. They reveal something fundamental about human nature's relationship with the terrifying vulnerability of unconsciousness. The transformation began during the Industrial Revolution, but not how you'd expect. When gaslighting arrived in London in 1807, newspapers didn't celebrate the conquest of darkness. They warned about unnatural illumination disrupting God's intended sleep patterns. The London Medical Repository of 1814 published articles claiming that gaslight would cause mass insanity by preventing proper sleep. Dr. Thomas Trotter wrote, "The human constitution is not designed for perpetual day. This artificial sun will create a race of wakeful monsters, neither properly asleep nor truly awake." Sound familiar? Replace gaslight with blue light from screens, and you have today's sleep science headlines. The two-sleep system didn't disappear, it went underground and became pathologized. Dr. Thomas Wehr's 1992 experiment at the National Institute of Mental Health, which I mentioned earlier, showed that humans naturally return to biphasic sleep when removed from artificial light. But here's the kicker. When his subjects experienced that peaceful, wakeful period between sleeps that medieval people cherished, modern participants initially reported it as insomnia and requested medication. We've literally medicalized what was once considered the most spiritual part of the night. The term sleep hygiene, coined by psychologist Peter Hari in 1977, would have made perfect sense to medieval people. His recommendations: cool, dark rooms, consistent bedtimes, avoiding stimulation before sleep, mirror medieval sleep protocols exactly. But while medieval people feared demons, we fear cortisol. While they worried about humoral imbalances, we obsess over hormonal imbalances. The vocabulary changed. The anxiety remained identical. Modern sleep paralysis experiences are virtually identical to medieval demon visitations. Dr. Shelley Adler's book, Sleep Paralysis, Nightmares, Nocebos, and the Mind-Body Connection, 2011, documents how immigrants to America often experience sleep paralysis in the form of their culture's traditional demons until they assimilate. Then they see aliens or shadow people instead. The old woman who sits on your chest becomes an alien conducting experiments. The incubus becomes sleep paralysis. We haven't escaped medieval night terrors, we've simply rebranded them. The economics of sleep have exploded beyond medieval imagination. The global sleep economy was valued at $432 billion in 2019, according to Statista. Medieval dream merchants would weep with envy at modern sleep consultants charging $500 per hour, sleep retreats costing $10,000 per week, and luxury mattresses priced at $100,000. The Hastings Vividus bed, handcrafted in Sweden, costs $200,000 and promises the sleep of royalty, literally marketing medieval royal sleep privilege to modern consumers. Our bedrooms have become technological versions of medieval sacred spaces. Where medieval people hung iron crosses and burned protective herbs, we install blackout curtains, white noise machines, and electromagnetic field blockers. The sleep sanctuary concept promoted by sleep expert Dr. Matthew Walker in Why We Sleep, 2017, perfectly mirrors medieval bedroom blessing rituals. Just substitute lavender essential oil diffusers for frankincense and CBD for holy water. The surveillance of sleep has reached levels that would have impressed medieval royal courts. The Oura Ring, Whoop Band, and 8 Sleep Pod collect more data about our sleep than Charles V's physician could have dreamed of. We've essentially hired digital servants to watch us sleep and report every deviation from the norm. The 8 Sleep Pod even adjusts temperature throughout the night, a technological recreation of medieval servants adding or removing blankets. Social media has recreated medieval communal sleeping in digital form. Sleep streams on Twitch, where people broadcast themselves sleeping to thousands of viewers, would have made perfect sense to medieval people who never slept alone. The streamer Amaranth reportedly earned $15,000 from a single sleep stream in 2022. We're literally paying to watch strangers sleep, just as medieval nobles paid for bedroom attendance. The moon's influence on sleep, dismissed as superstition for centuries, is being vindicated by modern research. Dr. Christian Kayochan's 2013 study at the University of Basel found that people sleep 20 minutes less during full moons, take longer to fall asleep, and have 30% less deep sleep, even in windowless sleep labs. The medieval fear of lunar influence wasn't entirely wrong. They just misunderstood the mechanism. Modern sleep divorce, couples sleeping in separate bedrooms has reached 25% of American couples according to the Better Sleep Council's 2022 survey. Medieval nobility, who maintained separate bedchambers, would find this completely normal. We're returning to aristocratic sleep arrangements, just calling it sleep optimization, instead of maintaining proper social hierarchy. The rise of sleep tracking apps has created a new form of sleep anxiety that medieval people would recognize. Orthosomnia, coined by researchers in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine 2017, describes the obsessive pursuit of perfect sleep scores. Medieval people who check their sleeping position obsessively to avoid the death pose would completely understand checking your sleep app first thing every morning. Professional sleep coaching has become the modern equivalent of medieval dream interpretation. Sleep coaches like those certified by the International Sleep Coaching Institute charge $200 to $500 per session to interpret sleep data and prescribe behavioral changes. Medieval dream merchants who charge for prophecies would recognize this business model immediately. The concept of sleep debt, popularized by William Dement in The Promise of Sleep, 1999, mirrors medieval beliefs about sleep being a finite resource that could be stolen or accumulated. We calculate sleep debt with the same anxiety medieval people calculated their exposure to night air or moonlight. Children's sleep has become a battlefield of competing theories that would seem familiar to medieval parents. The cry-it-out method versus attachment parenting debates mirror medieval arguments about whether children should sleep alone to build character or with parents for protection from demons. The Ferber method structured checking resembles medieval protocols for checking if children had assumed the death position. The wellness industry has resurrected medieval sleep remedies with scientific justification. Weighted blankets recreate the pressure of medieval sleeping boards. Melatonin supplements replace mandrake root. ASMR videos substitute for medieval midnight prayers. We're using the same solutions, just with different explanations. Even our architecture reflects medieval sleep fears. Master bedrooms move from the front of houses, showing status, to the back, seeking quiet, mimicking medieval progression from public to private sleep spaces. The average American master bedroom has grown from 120 square feet in 1950 to 309 square feet in 2020, approaching medieval royal bedchamber proportions. The pandemic of 2020 created a massive natural experiment in medieval sleep patterns. With commutes eliminated and schedules flexible, many people naturally drifted toward biphasic sleep. COVID-somnia wasn't just stress, it was millions of people suddenly experiencing medieval sleep patterns without the cultural framework to understand them. The rise of sleep tourism, traveling specifically for better sleep, would make sense to medieval pilgrims who journey to holy sites for dream prophecies. The Six Senses sleep program in Portugal, costing $4,000 per week, promises to reset your circadian rhythm through controlled light exposure, specific meal timing, and guided meditation, essentially recreating medieval monastic sleep rituals for wealthy moderns. Here's the truth that connects everything. We haven't evolved past medieval sleep anxieties because sleep remains fundamentally terrifying. Every night, we surrender consciousness, become vulnerable, and trust that we'll wake up again. No amount of technology or scientific understanding changes this basic existential terror. Medieval people clothed this fear in demons and humours. We dress it in cortisol and blue light, but the fear remains identical. Dr. Jerome Siegel, UCLA professor of psychiatry, argues that modern insomnia might partially result from fighting our natural sleep patterns. His research on pre-industrial societies shows they sleep 6.5 to 7 hours per night, not the 8 hours we're told we need. They also show seasonal variation in sleep duration that we've eliminated with climate control and artificial light. We've created new anxieties by establishing rigid sleep requirements that medieval people would have found bizarre. The future of sleep might look surprisingly medieval. Researchers at Stanford are experimenting with social sleeping apps where groups meditate together before bed, digital recreation of medieval communal prayers. MIT is developing dream control devices that can influence dream content, technological dream merchants. The military is researching biphasic sleep for improved performance, rediscovering the two-sleep system. As we close this 3-hour journey through medieval sleep, here's what I want you to remember. Every night when you perform your bedtime rituals, checking your phone one last time, adjusting your thermostat, taking your melatonin, setting your sleep tracking app, you're participating in an ancient human drama that transcends time and technology. Your medieval ancestors would recognize every one of your sleep anxieties, just dressed in different clothes. Tonight, when you lie down to sleep, you might notice things differently. That moment of vulnerability as you close your eyes. Medieval people felt it too. That flash of panic when you wake at 3 a.m. Your ancestors called it the devil's hour. You call it cortisol spike. That desperate desire for perfect sleep. They bought blessed candles and dream prophecies. You buy apps and supplements. We haven't conquered medieval sleep fears. We've simply translated them into modern language, and perhaps that's oddly comforting. Across centuries, cultures, and technologies, humans have always approached sleep with the same mixture of need and dread, seeking the same elusive perfect night's rest that has haunted our species since we first lay down in caves and worried about what lurked in the darkness. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, hopefully more peacefully after understanding that your sleep anxieties connect you to centuries of human experience, remember that you're participating in the most ancient human ritual of all, surrendering to the unknown and trusting you'll wake to face another day. Your medieval ancestors did it, surrounded by their fears of demons and night air. You do it, surrounded by your fears of screen time and sleep debt. And generations from now, our descendants will do it too with whatever new anxieties they've invented to explain the eternal mystery of sleep. Sweet dreams, my friends, or as a medieval person would say, may God give you good rest, and may you wake safely from your first sleep. Because no matter how much changes some things, like the strange, terrifying, necessary journey we take every night when we close our eyes, remain eternally, beautifully, mysteriously human.